connections to Australia's lands and waters. In accordance with the committee's resolution of 4 August 22, this hearing will be broadcast on the Parliament's website, and the proof and official transcripts of proceedings will be published on the inquiry website. Those present here today are advised that filming and recording are permitted during the hearing. I remind members of the media of the need to fairly and accurately report the proceedings of the committee. So I invite members of the committee to introduce yourselves. I'm Luke Gosling. I represent Darwin and Palmerston in the Federal Parliament. I'm the chair of the committee and very happy to be back in Lonnie. I haven't been here for many years, since a mate's 40th birthday party back in the day. It looks like it's grown a fair bit. So looking forward to hearing about all that and about your challenges.
Scotty Buchholz from Queensland. We'll be on the back of the Gold Coast.
And we've got a couple of our colleagues. The Deputy Chair's from Adelaide. He might not be on the dog and bone yet, but he will be soon. And Tracy Roberts from WA is going to join us at some point as well. But yeah, Scotty and I got plenty of questions for you, and I'm sure the Deputy Chair will as well when he is able to join us. So, the City of Launceston and Georgetown councils welcome you now to give evidence. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee? Thanks.
Nathan Williams, Chief Financial Officer at the City of Launceston.
Michael Newby, Chief Infrastructure Officer, City of Launceston.
Shane Power, General Manager of Georgetown Council.
Great. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to discussion. To assist with the transcription of the public hearing by Hansard, be appreciated if you could please state your name before responding to each question, but because we're all here and we should be pretty right. What happens on the phone is sometimes there's like 4 people on the phone and it's hard to track who's who in the zoo. But as our host town, we'll invite Launceston to go first. This is a chance, I suppose, to give an initial opening statement to really focus on the big things you want us to take away, and then we'll go into Q&A afterwards and tease out a bit more.
Great. Happy for me to go?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So the City of Launceston has a population of approximately 72,000 people, which has grown slowly but steadily in recent years. Unlocking future residential growth corridors is a key strategic concern for the City of Launceston, as well as providing the supporting planning and infrastructure work for this to occur. The likely upfront costs to provide all of this infrastructure and planning work to deliver these new homes is likely in the tens of millions of dollars. The City of Launceston is the owner and operator of a number of regional facilities, including the Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery, University of Tasmania Stadium, which is currently in negotiations to be transferred to Stadiums Tasmania, the Launceston Leisure and Aquatic Centre, the Albert Hall, Riverbend Park, Carvilla Cemetery and the Launceston Way Centre. Whilst these facilities provide many opportunities for our community, they also come with a significant cost, which the City of Launceston ratepayers bear the cost of. The reality is that many users from neighbouring councils use these facilities on a daily basis, and the City of Launceston does not receive the requisite revenue from these users, whose rates are paid to neighbouring councils, who do not have the cost of these regional facilities to manage. As one of Australia's oldest cities, managing ageing infrastructure renewals and upgrades remains a challenge within our existing capital works budget. The provision of ongoing capital expenditure from other tiers of government would assist significantly in maintaining appropriate levels of infrastructure renewals. Typically, federal and state government grants for built infrastructure projects do not come with the provision for ongoing operational and maintenance costs associated with these projects. Council bears the life cycle costs associated with these projects, many of which, such as community parks and play spaces, do not generate any income. Council has found recently that community expectations with regard to the quality and diversity of service delivery has grown, but the community's capacity and/or want to pay has not increased in line with this. Recent services that the City of Launceston has had increased involvement with include homelessness, emergency management, environmental sustainability, and the provision of cultural services, to name a few. Cost of living pressures felt more broadly in Australia have impacted local community members, and the Council is feeling the impact of the rising costs for many of the services which it provides. As a major employer in northern Tasmania with over 500 staff, providing appropriate paying conditions is a delicate balance which City of Launceston continues to monitor against the needs of our staff and the community's capacity to fund this through the additional rates growth needed.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything to that, Monica? Covered it all.
Covered it all.
I'm tempted to start out asking questions, but we'll go to Georgetown first.
Yeah, thank you. Members of Parliament appreciate the opportunity, well, Georgetown Council appreciates the opportunity today provided by the Commonwealth in your inquiry into sustainability of local government. It's something our council has grappled with for some time. My arrival in 2019, the council itself was heading down a path into administration, some financial difficulties. I'm pleased to say that is no longer the problem. We are in a surplus, generating 72% of our own revenue, which has been quite a turnaround. However, the challenges still remain for us. Just in the context of what I'll talk about today, some will span Commonwealth initiatives and opportunities and pleads, if you like, and some will fall into the state government realm as well. But nonetheless, I think it all feeds into the picture of what local government as a sector, particularly in Tasmania, requires for ongoing sustainability. You may be aware or you may not, we've gone through, when I came across to Tasmania, I was told that amalgamations were off the table, and I don't think it's been a conversation that hasn't been discussed almost on a monthly basis since my arrival. However, the last reiteration of that exercise resulted in no amalgamations coming forth being imposed by the state government. In fact, I think there's maybe one to two that might be exploring a voluntary arrangement. So the status quo remains in that regard. The community I represent is a small community on the northern part of the Tamar, east side of the Tamar River. We're home to a small population of about 7,300, I think the last ABS ERP was. We're an industrial-based town, home to Bell Bay, which we like to think is a world-class port. It currently represents 60% of the region's GRP and state's export capacity. In dollar terms, it's over $6 billion per annum generated out of there at present. Our workforce, or the workforce there, is represented by the three Tamar Valley councils in Georgetown, Launceston and West Tamar. And that's one of the things that we as a council are trying to shift in terms of our representation of that workforce, to get a greater portion of our people working in our own backyard where the wealth is being made and generated. We want that reinvested back into our community. To do that, we need to improve our livability, and livability requires large capital. And I'll take the opportunity to thank the Minister of Infrastructure, Catherine King, and the government for their recent funds coming forth for what we're building in a new aquatic centre. So some $15 million came from the Commonwealth. We secured 2.5 out of the state, as well as committing our own funds. So I just want to take the opportunity to recognise and thank the government for that. But these are things that we need to invest in to make sure that when people are choosing to live in the Tamar Valley, that we become a competitive and compelling environment or opportunity or option for them to come and live. Typically that has not been the case. The industrial history of our part of the world has been both the golden goose, but also has left us with a lot of social economic challenges. We had the pulp mill fold. We've also had a large housing stock that was owned previously by your Rio Tintos and your BHPs that were gifted back to state government, which of course transitioned into public housing. And our percentage of low socioeconomic population, I suppose, is much larger than elsewhere across the state as a result. In fact, we have the lowest CEFA index in Tasmania, both the highest unemployment rate overall and in youth, and the youth space is growing. We have low literacy levels, both in education, also in health. And there's certainly an opportunity that we would like to discuss around potential decentralisation of services to improve regional access to education and health services. There's a number of things, I'm not sure if they'll form part of your questions, but none of this will be foreign to the government. But Council supports ALGA's position and ALGAT's, and certainly the majority of councils would have thought across the country to reinstate the financial assistance grant scheme to 1% of overall tax revenue that the Commonwealth collects. We're aware of Albanese having committed an increase in that funding stream prior to elections, so we're keen to see that come through. We do recognise there has been an increase in R2R and other funding programs, but the FAG scheme is untied, and it allows councils to be able to direct that money where they feel most appropriate. Likewise, the former community infrastructure, local roads and infrastructure program, would like to see that reinstated. That freed up capital coming from the Commonwealth to councils to be able to invest in things that they couldn't otherwise afford to do. We would also like to see, whether it's the Commonwealth, as I said to you before, some of this will transition into state jurisdiction, but in our jurisdiction here, things like investment in renewables as wind farms, solar and everything in between, the capital gains that are associated with the land on which it is built is paid back on a rates equivalent through to the state government and not to the local councils, as it is in other jurisdictions, certainly in my experience in Victoria, where I was previously to coming here. We, on that as well, on behalf of developers that are currently pitching and scoping and pitching for wind farm investment in the Bass Strait. So, Gippsland went first, the Bass Strait. We understand that the zones that have been declared in there, if there's an overlap of two developers crossing over into a zone, it will exclude one from the other. We think that the rules around that need to be looked at, because you could be excluding one just because of a bureaucratic line, if you like, drawn across a map. So we think there is risk in that. We want to see fast track in renewables as well. Georgetown has played host to many large investment companies from around the globe. Southern Asia, Europe, and indeed Australia. Your Fortescues, your Woodsides have recently exited, citing not enough energy provision here, which is true. We've only got about 300 meg available to be able to distribute across the network at this point in time, which would allow one of them in their stage one to stand up. So we need to be able to fast track that renewable energy. We think that can be done, through a number of avenues, but you've got the Marinus, which is a Commonwealth as well as a multi-state project, as is the Battery of the Nation. So we think the Commonwealth has a role, does have a role to play. How we can make that a fast track process would be an absolutely intergenerational game changer, not just for our community, but for that of Northern Tasmania and Tasmania itself, whilst also feeding the rest of the country electrons when it needs it. We are 100% green energy down in Tasmania at the moment with a 200% target, but we're just not moving fast enough. So we're seeing, we host, as I said, a number of large investment companies that come over here, both from Europe and Asia, that are now going to America because the American government is subsidising power points on hydrogen per tonne, etc. So it's a much more attractive investment opportunity over in the US than it is here at the moment. What else have I got listed here? there's another major concern I think we hold as a sector, which is a little bit scary, I suppose, in terms of liability and litigation through climate change and the ability for councils to fund climate resilient and adaptation infrastructure and strategies. So, you know, if you look at a stormwater system, for instance, those are designed typically, well, 1 in 10, before I got here, I may actually come to learn that some places in Tasmania, including Georgetown, had systems as low as 1 in 5 events. So they just won't cope. So we're really concerned that both insurances will become unaffordable or even unattainable, but to invest in infrastructure that's going to prepare us for climate change is certainly out the realm of what we could afford as a council and as a sector. In terms of other legislative influence, we'd like to see some changes in the National Building Code to provide greater flexibility to allow paraprofessionals to operate, as building surveys are becoming more and more rare across our sector, not just in Tasmania but across the country. Migration policy, we'd love to be able to work with the Commonwealth around how we can get more skilled migrants to our communities. We've got a high unemployment rate in Georgetown, but as a state we've got a very low unemployment rate at the moment, and there is a need for more migration to come in the skilled space when we're getting new industry coming on board. So we talked about Sun Cable earlier. As I just mentioned, we've had the Fortescues and the Woodsides recently announced exits out of their hydrogen strategy here, but we have others, Enable Energy and a couple of other large international investors looking to establish out of Bell Bay alone as well. So we'd like to see things like the investment of the Defence Academy out at the Newnham campus accelerate if we could. We know that's a Commonwealth initiative as well. And in terms of decentralisation of services, there's always been an argument around saving dollars by centralisation of services, but those that live in rural communities know that when you take out state, Commonwealth and local government services from a community, you take away a lot of jobs. You take away the 2.4 ratio. One person employed brings a partner and 0.4 of a family with them. That helps you with your schools and all your other local service provisions as well. So we think there's an opportunity for greater representation out in the rural areas. If I look at Georgetown, for instance, NDIS services, we're underspent by multiple millions, undersubscribed. We do have a low health literacy there, fair enough. Some may not know what's available to them in that space, but transportation and cost of getting to services has been highlighted through our surveys. We've had a recent agency established in Georgetown who their business is all about attracting professionals in to take up the NDIS scheme in Georgetown and hopefully have allied health professionals, for instance, established there, because the care economy opportunities there are around 14 million per annum apparently. So there are market opportunities to meet gaps that can help more than just address people in need, but also give us an economic boost in a community that is ageing, and like the rest of Tasmania, losing our young and skilled to the mainland and other places that pay a bit more. But I think it's just another piece of the puzzle for us to become a more livable place, as well as filling some of those needs. I think that's the main point. So I think I wanted to get across to the committee today. And again, I just wanted to say thank you very much for the opportunity, and do want to call out Minister King again. She's a great advocate of ours. Comes from the town of Ballarat, and where I spent some of my early years out at Scarsdale. So a lot of time for Catherine King, and I do appreciate the funding she's provided us thus far.
Cool.
We've got a couple other dollars to help us finish off the project, though. We'll take that as well.
No worries. All right. Well, so how are you going with your time? Because we can give you some quick fire ones if you need to shoot off.
No, this this opportunity takes precedence over the next one. So.
Yeah. Okay. Just because while it's fresh in my mind, migration policy is being brought up a lot. We're doing a review at the moment. The Commonwealth is into regional migration settings and whether they should be, calibrated in a different way to incentivise regional Australia and their needs for people. You mentioned the Defence Academy. Did you mean the Australian Maritime College
No.
thing?
No,
What's-
so the Newnham campus has a. If you give me a second to go on to another question, I'll find out exactly what I'm talking about. But it was like it's a defence academy that's meant to be located at the Newnham campus.
So the University of Tasmania
Yeah.
is relocating into Inveresk. If you go for a little walk down there, you'll see that they're about to open their brand new building down there, and they've quite deliberately moved their services closer into the city, which we've been a huge advocate for.
Right.
So I think what Shane's referring to is the Defence Academy moving into the old University of Tasmania site in the northern suburbs.
This is Defence Tasmania. Because there's a maritime college
There is
down
Maritime
There
College
is
as well.
Maritime College
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Well,
So the Defence. No, this is Commonwealth. So Defence Innovation Precinct for Tasmania.
Defence Innovation
Yeah.
Precinct. Okay. Do you know much about that? No.
It's it's like a 2020 commitment, so it's got some age on it already. Yeah.
It's
It was part of the original city deal.
a city deal thing, right?
So the AMC is part of that, but it really includes a defence presence there as well. Yeah.
All right, how far away is the AMC from here? Is it in Lonnie or?
Yeah, it's in the municipality. It's probably a 15-minute drive from here.
Okay.
5 kilometres, yeah, not far.
Rightio. And just so we're on the same Mariners link, is the power cable that goes to the mainland. And when you talk about battery of the nation, that's hydroelectric. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how you got your 100% hydro and so forth. All right, well, Lonnie, we'll just shoot this one in particular at both of you, but it's just focusing on local government sustainability, so financial sustainability. How do you define and measure it? We're obviously looking at a range of things, including what the quantum of financial assistance grants are and how they're distributed. But in what way do you define and measure financial sustainability?
I think it's being able to deliver an appropriate level of service to our community that's considered an affordable level to the community. So we can measure it in a number of different ways, but without wanting to get too financial or technical, that is probably how I would define it. So what I mean by that is probably keeping our rates revenue, which is about 2/3 of our overall revenue, keeping that affordable for the community, but also being able to provide a level of service that they consider adequate. So, I mean, we could completely gut our service levels to a point where the community isn't happy with it, and we could also drop our rates to 1 or 2% increase each year. To me, that's not a good outcome, though. Alternatively, we could try and gold plate every single thing we deliver, but we'd have to put rates up by 15% per year, and again, that's not going to be tolerable to anybody.
The 22-23 report, I think it had 60% from rates.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yep.
So is that gone up a bit?
Ever so slightly, I'd say, for 23-24, which we've just put a bow on. Yeah, but it's still in that sort of 60 to 65% range. Yeah, and that's pretty consistent for us.
No worries. And how? I mean, just sum up the pressure points on the city in terms of financial sustainability.
Financially, look, it's
I mean,
probably
you're doing well.
it's probably the expectation from the community on the services that they want to deliver and what they want to see. New strategic housing growth corridors is a big issue for us as a municipality. So our population growth has been very, very slow and steady in the last decade, I would say. So frankly, we need more houses, and we need them as soon as possible. as an old city, the land supply is an issue that we have identified. Our role in that is to probably help facilitate private development, but also help provide the infrastructure that's associated with new suburbs, new subdivisions. So that comes at a really significant initial cost to us as a council, but we don't receive any revenue for many, many years from rates for that. So there's a high initial upfront outgoing for us, and the revenue really does lag many, many years behind that. And as I touched on in my opening statement, we've been involved in many things that typically we haven't been, such as response to homelessness in the community, emergency management, stepping in where the private sector has failed in some instances as well, and the community's ability to support some of those initiatives through increased rates is a real struggle at the moment with cost of living. We don't feel like we can increase rates by more than probably 3, 4, 5% is really the upper threshold of where we think the community can tolerate at the moment.
Did you want to ask about the? We've just been getting a fair bit of evidence about your part of the process of getting land development consent process through. Is that pretty quick? Like if a developer wants to develop a new housing estate, you're charging some fees, which is some income for you guys, but is it like, just describe that process. Is it reasonably quick here for a developer to get through their approvals?
Look, this is just my experience, but what I'd say is that process is also dependent on the constant and the will of the developer themselves. So we are at tension with certain developers that may come online very quickly and show all good intent. We rush over to there to plan the infrastructure response, and then their desire to develop may dwindle, and then we get pulled in a different direction. So in terms of time frames, we're drawn between competing priorities across the land availability, is what I would say, from an infrastructure planning perspective. Because the planning for such requires additional resource if you spread the load too far in terms of your land releases.
And there was a mention of surveyors before, but for the city here, is town planners, can you find them when you need them from a workforce point of view?
It's a challenge. It's a challenge. We have struggled with that in recent years. I feel like it's started to turn a little bit more in our favour in the last 12 months or so. We've just put on a few planners at quite a high strategic level, and that is appealing in the job market. Where we've probably struggled in recent years is we put on graduate or more junior planners. They get 12 months experience and then they get poached by a private firm who can pay them significantly more. And we find that with engineers, IT professionals, legal as well.
Broader skill base that's required for these planning works. It's not just the town planner. Quite often.
We had a Bass Strait subsidy kind of thing with the transportation as well, applied for our employment market, to be honest. So, like you say, we train them up and they go elsewhere for higher pay. When I came across in 2019, a building surveyor at Melbourne City Council was at 190k. There's no way you're going to be able to afford that down here. So if they can make it elsewhere, they'll take it elsewhere. So, we've got, it's a statewide thing here around skills, retention, and, I think it represents rural Australia, really, when you're looking at statistics around the country as well. So what I will say in defence of our planning system, not the system itself from a state perspective, but from a council perspective, is that largely, particularly in the north, the DAs are turned over well within compliance timeframes. Less than 1% go to appeal processes, and less than half of that percent are upheld by a commission. So I'd say what we do with our resources in that space is pretty good.
I'll go to Scotty, last one from me, and then we'll circle back if we've got time. But, so livability, you can't compete in many ways with Melbourne, particularly with the private sector, for wages, but people obviously live here because of the lifestyle. And improving livability, I'd noticed in a previous annual report that there was 15 mil for a community centre or something in a part of Launceston?
The Northern Recreation
Yeah.
Hub. Yeah, so that's about a $45 million project. I think 15 million from the
15
Commonwealth, I think.
So that's, yeah, I mean, that's a livability thing. What sort of population base is that supporting in the northern area of the city?
I think it's around about 1/3 of the municipality lives in the northern suburbs. And as Shane touched on, there's some real social and economic issues out there.
Challenges, yeah.
There are some real challenges, so we're hoping that will really help in that regard. In terms of the general livability, you're quite right. We can't compete with mainland capital cities in terms of how much we pay people. It's that livability piece, and people who might want to move here during their early to late 30s when they want to buy a home and raise a family. That's where we see our appeal. We might not be able to compete on the dollars, but the lifestyle, we certainly think we can.
So what's a mum and dad and a couple of kids, were they looking out for a basic house?
A lot more than they were a few years ago. Look, it's probably 700,000 to 800,000 for a nice house in and around Launceston, whereas you go back 3 or 4 years, it's probably 500.
Scotty, did you have any?
Not too much, other than thank you for your presentations this morning. One of the consistent messages that we've received from around the country is twofold. The fags one always comes up, and then the other issue that's been front and centre has been the frustration of cost shifting from state government. And one of the things that Local Government Association has done extremely well is it's been managed to get both sides of the political divide to say no to a 1% increase. I mean, I don't think there's any other organisation that has united us on a policy position. But I do think that there's an appetite, conditional, for because the claim being put forward, particularly when you get into those more regional, remote areas, is quite deafening. You mean for not as much from the capital cities. I mean, in Brisbane, one of my closer areas, the fags payments they received is dwarfed by their parking fine revenue.
Yeah.
And if you on the distribution model of a percentage, the big winners are not your regional and remote areas. They're the Sydney, Melbourne, the larger councils. So my question, and I want to learn from you guys, is if there was to be a distribution, how would you inoculate yourself from the state just shifting more cost to you? So if they knew you had more revenue coming, they're just going to go bang. The compliments to the concerted effort to the federal government for the 1% campaign, but I just haven't seen any energy of the same coordinated approach to the states who are just pulling your pants down. Maybe not here, but
This constitutional recognition of local government might be a start.
really, that's the stopper. Okay, well you're on record.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
That's it?
We're not in there, are we? So we are a servant of the state government as it stands. To be honest, you issue GST revenue to the states, and then the states pass that on with respect as legislation for the financial assistance grants to local government, and then they pass it on. So it's again it's administered by the state underneath the state grants commission schemes that they see fit to. In consultation with local government around whatever the formula might look like to distribute the schemes. I echo exactly what you say. I come from rural, both metropolitan and rural Victoria, and so as my colleague in the back here will tell you, luckily we don't have rate capping here, because I don't know how the rural communities in rate capped environments survive, to be honest, without financial assistance coming outside of their rate base, particularly in populations that are in decline. So. Having 1% rent. So, are you suggesting that we need a state, bipartisan state position?
No, I think what I was getting to
or?
is that compliments to the choreographed strategy of asking for a 1% campaign
Yep.
for the feds. I just haven't seen the same level of advocacy and enthusiasm directed at the state,
Yep.
saying, that's enough with the cost shifting.
Yep.
But if you think those two are tied to a constitutional,
Yeah.
that's your prerogative to put that on.
I'd be interested to see what my colleagues say here around state shifting of services. It's my personal experience, having done over nearly 2 decades in local government in Victoria. Yes, that was a larger issue of state services being shifted onto local government and not indexed. So here you go, take over a library and at the same
cost.
No, yeah, that's
No
right.
remuneration.
Here's a budget shift, and there's no indexation according to that. But I do know, and again, it's funny, my colleague in the room here was at an adjoining council when I was in Victoria when the rate capping came in, and his council at the time quite rightly reminded the government they can take back their libraries, their child crossing supervisors, the whole lot. So it was, and then we were able to achieve some financial assistance that way. But my experience here is it hasn't been as bad as it has in other jurisdictions. So, our library, for instance, our childcare facilities, earlier years, childhood education.
Are you doing
still
aged
state-run.
care?
No, we're not. No, we're not doing home care assistance. Or that's still state run at the moment.
Sorry, can I just say, are Launceston doing aged care provision?
We do not.
Yeah. Having said that, I think there's an argument that councils do it better because they're more localised, and but not at the expense of having to fund it through their own rate revenues. Without the indexation support from the state budget.
Can I just clarify something? I don't know that anyone in the government has said that 1% is not happening. Part of the rationale from this, I think a representative from the federal opposition has said not happening when there was an ALGA. But I just thought that worth clarifying so there wasn't any misunderstanding. Part of this committee's job is to make recommendations to the federal government. So this is a House of Representatives committee. We'll write a report and that'll give recommendations to the federal government. But there is a significant financial outlay in 1%. So just put that there for the record. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's additional funding for financial assistance grants going forward. So this idea of the principles of how that's distributed and the idea of that horizontal equalisation, it sort of goes to what you were saying before about there should be a Bass Strait thing. We think there should be a desert thing in Darwin, because of the increased costs of getting goods and services to the top end. So any thoughts on how you think being part of a regional Tasmanian area that we should be looking at distributing any sort of additional funding?
I think it'd be really interesting to look at, particularly the major metropolitans and their rating mix, so residential, commercial, industrial, sport and rec, because I know in Tasmania, Hobart's obviously the capital city, they get a significant amount of their rates revenue from the commercial sector. I would imagine we're at Launceston, easily the second most in terms of our mix, but then when you have a look at Georgetown and the more rural councils, their commercial rating is going to be very, very low. If you look at Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, etc., it's going to be astronomically high. I think the capacity to pay in the commercial sector is obviously significantly more than in the residential sector, who are struggling with cost of living pressures. So I think that could potentially guide it. What is that commercial rating mix versus your mums and dads and your farmers and your sport and rec and those types of categories? What's their capacity to pay? I think that would be an interesting lens to review this all through.
I agree with that.
your non-traditional rate, residential rate revenue sources. I know with us, a large portion of us is funded through industry, and two large industries. If one of those were to go, and one came under a dark cloud not so many years ago in the manganese smelter, and even the aluminium one's only running at margins. If one of those were to go, then the council wouldn't have the funding ability to deliver the services it does now. And, the whole host of other things would go completely bad as well for our local community, heavily relying on that. So
They're responsible for your, and your good management, I'm sure, responsible for your surpluses?
who's that? The industry or
the industry? The
no,
rates they're paying?
No, I think we budget to have a 1% variation either way.
You got 5%, haven't you?
Yeah, we have. We've achieved that, but we're budgeting at 1%. So I'll put it down to direct great management. But there are other influences, of course. Labour hire is always one that's of interest. So if you've got, employment transitioning from, someone who's left and replacing them, can take 3 months or longer. So there's periods of time when you're not, drawing down on your employment budget lines, which does help. Yeah.
And just further to that, I think when we talked about it earlier, many of the vacancies in local government at the moment are the really highly paid ones, such as your lawyers, your engineers, your building surveyors, and that can take months and months to recruit for, particularly looking into state as well.
Yeah.
What are your what are your two council areas vacancy rates? Roughly.
Our annual turnover has been at 12, anywhere between 7 and 12% since my commencement. Yeah.
So I think we hover around 10%, and we have for the last few years, which is a little bit below the national average. I think the national average is about 15.
Yeah, in the public sector.
In the public sector, yeah.
The public sector is worse than the outside. Yeah. Yeah. But we've been sending, I've sent some of my directors across to different areas like World Health Congress to go and meet some potential EHOs and things like that to encourage to come across. So we're trying a number of different sort of recruitment methodologies, if you like, that are not as typical. So if you jump on a taxi and you're having a chat to someone who's a migrant here, you ask them what their background is, and they're an engineer, I tell them to come and visit us. As I say, you take any opportunity, I suppose, we can find a certain skill set that we need to cover.
Is there anything else on workforce that either council wanted to mention? There's there have been some evidence around the role of the federal government to provide financial programs to support local governments to attract and retain the local government workforce. Do you think there's a role for that?
I'm not across the specifics of that, but I'm not so sure about that. Something that has been talked about obviously today is the Bass Strait allowance, or the desert allowance, I think. So perhaps a recognition of relocation costs, and that would certainly help. Just a comment on our workforce. It's typical, I imagine, of local government around Australia in terms of the age profile and the length of service as well. So that's certainly a challenge at the moment, as a number of staff are inching towards retirement and needing to plan for the future. Typically, you're not going to get people leaving school in this day and age and staying in the same job for 40 years, whereas we've had that at council over many decades. So just needing to contemporise the way we do things is a challenge at the moment.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think there is something in that. I think, if you're looking at, your migrant skilled workers coming to regions and spending the 3 years or whatever it might be to be able to, get their visas and that extended, there might be some sort of similar program in that vein, if you like. I think it's ANZ SOG or SOEG is a Commonwealth-owned training provider with Australia and New Zealand, primarily based at state and Commonwealth educational pathways, if you like. I'm not sure if there's something in that as well around the local government pathways that could be supported across the country. Our national local government association, if you like, professionals association, has been wound up. So we've now got local government professionals in each state, but none of them sort of coordinate. Well, ours is completely under-resourced, being Tasmania. Others are great examples in South Australia and in Victoria, for instance. But yeah, there might be some opportunity there where there's clearer pathways into local government from typical and non-typical academic pathways.
Yeah. Look, I tend to agree with Shane. I mean, as you stated before, that you'd be prepared to take any opportunity you get. When we experience demand in the market for construction activities, local government is typically the one that suffers. We get a lot of skilled professionals move out of local government and then seek to move back in when the demand dips below the capacity to deliver again. Which drives, we can't compete with the private sector in terms of their agility and wage offering and those sort of aspects. So we tend to lose our skilled professionals and then they'll filter back when the demand starts to peter down a little bit. So any opportunity for skilled workers to better meet the demand in the market, I'm sure all of us would be really grateful.
And that has just reminded me about one other thing I did want to raise today around inflation impacts on councils. So I thank the Minister for the third time for the 15 million. By the time we get the money into our accounts, so through our best efforts on quantity surveying, independent surveying, all the rest of it, your cost estimates, the inflationary environment has blown that out of the water. So, whether or not future capital grants could have some sort of contingency built in, or, whether if your funding pool's 500 million, maybe 25% of that's reserved for helping to bail out those that have got grants, from commitment to in the bank account to be able to afford the inflation that's occurred there. I know many projects have been handed back, and I know many of us have been to Canberra asking for a couple of dollars extra without much success. So in our instance, we'll be looking at a generational loan to fill the void that's been created by the inflationary market. So.
Yeah, I'd like to second that, and we've got a number of projects that have been rolled out shortly post-COVID, and getting an external provider to actually go and construct and do the work has led to many delays, and as Shane touched on, significant cost variations that the council has had to fund.
No, point taken. We've got a few minutes left. Is there anything that you feel like you haven't touched on that you wanted to? I'd just note also that the local federal member, Bridget Archer, was going to pop in this morning, but also saw that Albo was here overnight, so she might be tied up. So she might be tied up with him. But yeah, just that she'd taken interest in what our committee's doing.
I think for Georgetown, if I might, in the last minute, just to reiterate, and I know it doesn't tie neatly into local government sustainability overall, but I will refer back to the Bell Bay opportunity, and I know there is some subsidy around hydrogen, per tonne and all the rest of it, that has made our, the production of such fuel more competitive on a global scale through subsidisation or tax relief, whatever it might be. There is an opportunity using our green, 100% green renewable brand at this point in time on a global scale. That window will close, that competitive advantage will close. So, as I said, we've played host to all sorts of companies with large asset portfolios and big money, much larger than your Fortescues and your Woodsides, for instance. We're talking about Asian and the fuel demands, as you know, in Europe and the premiums they're prepared to pay. There are large opportunities right now to that precinct that will bring population growth with it, that will benefit certainly the northern Tasmania economic situation and then in turn local government sustainability as well. And then on population, Tasmania, again, in comparison to rural and regional Australia, our population is ageing. So whilst we are a great lifestyle place, you'll hear a lot of people going, "Oh, yeah, I love Tasmania. Well, I'll retire there one day." That's our plan, which is great. We welcome them, but they also come with their health issues as well. So it puts increasing pressure on our health and aged care systems that are already under great pressure. So I thought I'd throw that in. And thank you once again for the opportunity.
Probably why the PM was at the hospital this morning. Final points? Anything you wanted to mention that you haven't had a chance?
Just again to highlight the fact that Launceston, as the regional hub of northern Tasmania, does carry the can for a number of regional facilities and assets. We're obviously very happy to see our neighbours from other councils, such as Shane. But that does come at a cost to our ratepayer within the municipality that is not shared by the greater northern community more generally. So recognition of that through financial means would be significantly appreciated and would help regional capital, and it would help lessen the load on our ratepayers, many of which are in that lower socio-economic bracket as well and are struggling to pay their day-to-day bills and with cost of living pressures as well.
No, you've made those points well. Final question from me. What effect does Macquarie Stadium, or whatever it is, have on your stadium? Because didn't Hawthorn used to play here?
Currently play 4 games a year in Launceston. That deal has at least 2 more years to go, as I understand it. So we're in negotiations with Stadiums Tasmania, who are an entity of the state government, to transfer our stadium across to them. So they will own and manage all the major stadiums across Tasmania.
Good for the city of Lonnie, yeah?
We think so. Yeah, we think so. So that was a proposal brought forward by the city of Launceston to the state government initially. So the stadium runs at a loss of about $4 million a year. And frankly, the state government's probably got a better skill set to own and operate such a significant bit of infrastructure. So that's one positive outcome that we've worked through.
It's grand final week, so I thought I'd finish on a footy note. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for your time and for sharing it with us.
Just before you conclude.
We've got Deputy Chair on there. Sorry, I didn't know you were there.
Yeah,
Tony.
I just wanted to say apologies for being late. I gave notice I would be. I wanted to apologise to the men I've just been listening to. I didn't want to interrupt the conversation, but I joined about 10 minutes ago.
No worries, and you would have heard me refer to the local member wanted to make it here, but there's a fair bit going on. No, thanks, Tony. As I introduced the Deputy Chair earlier on from South Australia. So thanks for your attendance. I don't think we've asked you to provide any additional information, but if you do have any you wanted to provide after this, can I encourage you? I know it's time consuming to put in submissions, but even though pretty much no one put in submissions, I wanted to come to Northern Tassie, or we wanted to come to Northern Tassie to get some evidence from here, knowing the pressures on regional areas of the country. But yeah, feel free if there's any additional things that you wanted to send in, get that into us by the 11th of October into the Secretariat. We'll send you a copy of the transcript of today, so you have a look at the evidence you gave. You'd have an opportunity to request any correction to transcription errors that there might have been, but usually it's all pretty good. So thanks very much for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yes, thank you. We're going to Brisbane support, Sydney support.
Resume the sitting, please. Because you weren't here at the start, I can just say this bit. Those present here today are advised that filming and recording are permitted during the hearing. I remind members of the media of the need to fairly and accurately report the proceedings of the committee. This hearing is going to be broadcast on the Parliament's website, and the proof and official transcripts of proceedings will be published on the inquiry website. I'm Luke Gosling, the chair of this committee. I represent Darwin and Palmerston. It's pretty much as far as you can get from here. Flew down last night, and it was just, beautiful getting across the strait and looking at the northern Tasmania. I don't know, I might have been asleep. I didn't see Flinders Island, but I'm looking forward to going there one day.
That would be great.
I got friends, I got family and friends down here in Tassie, and we were, as I said, pretty adamant that we get down here. We've got the deputy chair on the telephone from South Australia. You with us there, Tony?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Yeah, great. We just got Flinders Island Council. Do you go by Flinders Island Council?
No, just Flinders Council.
Just Flinders Council. Great. And thanks for flying in for this. And Scotty?
Scotty Bookholz from Queensland, southeast corner, regional rural electorate.
And Ms Roberts from WA, she may or may not be joining us for this part of the session. For the Hansard record, can you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
I am Rachel Ann Summers. I am the Mayor of Flinders Council.
Warren,
You're the mayor.
Warren Kenneth Groves. I'm the General Manager of Flinders Council.
Good line, yes.
Great. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to discussion. To assist the transcription, it's only two of you and you're here, we should be pretty right. Sometimes if there's a lot of people on the phone, you sort of lose track when they're trying to transcribe it of who's who, but I think we'll be right this morning. And I now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to a bit of Q&A. And this is the opportunity just to get you the main things you want to get across, and then we'll just have some Q&A. But thanks very much, Mayor.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to address the committee today. I do beg your indulgence. I believe that my statement might be longer than the 2 minutes that we have been allocated.
Take as long as you want.
Thank you.
You've got that liberty. You take as long as
Thank you so much. The Furneaux Group of Islands is defined by its striking landscapes, deep historical significance, and a strong sense of unity. Life can be challenging, but our community is committed to preserving their identity, valuing sustainability, supporting one another, and creating meaningful connections. We take a thoughtful approach to change and embrace the island's pace and traditions. Flinders Council is the smallest Tasmanian council by population, but we are the 13th largest in size, consisting of more than 50 islands. Our municipality extends north to Redondo Island, a mere 10 kilometres from Victoria's Wilson's Promontory, and south to Clark Island, just 24 kilometres from mainland Tasmania. Unlike some of the other remote and rural councils of Tasmania, we are showing steady and positive population growth, increasing from 702 residents in 2011 to approximately 980 today. However, as our population grows, so do the expectations of our community, the requirements of the state and federal government, and our costs. In the 23-24 financial year, our budget was $7.8 million. This was made up of $2.6 million in rates, $1.2 million in user fees and charges, leaving $4 million that came through grants. so 50% of our budget. Our employee costs alone are $2.6 million. We manage $97 million worth of assets, a large part of which is our roads and an airport that was kindly gifted to us by the federal government in the 90s. The airport currently runs at a loss of around $750,000 per year. Our general financial assistance grant is $1 million. We are forced to operate at a loss year after year simply because our rate base is too small. Our priority of projects that we advocate for are not for luxury infrastructure, no stadiums or fancy galleries. We're advocating for essentials: a CASA-certified airport, compliant wastewater treatment, housing, childcare, things that are necessary for any community to function, and yet our funding has been reduced and our grants are not indexed. Back in 1992, when councils received 1.2% of gross taxation, our job was simple: rates, roads and rubbish. Now we are running airports, operating gyms, organising community events, developing school holiday programs, and some councils are even in childcare, healthcare and aged care. We act as undertakers. And all the while our federal financial assistance has been slashed by 50%. This is highly challenging. The federal assistance grant needs to be restored to its former level at the very least. We can't charge parking fees like big city councils or levy user charges to raise greater income. Our community groups, the very heart of our islands, are the most frequent users of our facilities. The solution is equity, not equality. The current system treats all councils as if we're the same, but we are not. The one-size-fits-all approach rewards few and hinders the progress of many. A tiered approach is needed, one that recognises the need of councils and not just population size. A 1% financial assistance grant would mean that we can deliver services that we did in the 90s. 2% would make us run break even, and 3% would actually make us financially sustainable. And it needs to be untied. We're saddled with an ever-growing burden of unfunded mandates, regulations from bodies like the EPA, MRT and CASA. They heap red tape onto us without a single dollar of support. From managing climate change policies, emergency service levies, child safety, imposing exorbitant audit fees and rate exemptions, small councils like ours are drowning in responsibilities with no lifeline. Sometimes if we aren't able to meet their ever-changing regulations, we are fined, further preventing us from reaching their targets. Cost shifting is crippling councils across Australia. In Queensland, it went from costing $47 million in 2011 to $360 million today. In New South Wales, councils are burdened with $1.36 billion in extra costs, and Tasmania is no different. 15 out of 29 councils are operating in deficit, and the ones like us on the fringes are the ones paying the heaviest price. Cost shifting has to be fully funded and permanently, and the higher levels of government need to take responsibility for their areas. As an example, Flinders Council is looking to become property developers just so that we are able to recruit and retain staff. And even then, we'll be cycling houses to create affordable options for our residents. We shouldn't be having to do this. Why are we stepping into the roles that the private sector and other levels of government should handle? Grants are another story of inefficiency and frustration. A minister announces a grant and then we have to wait months, sometimes nearly a year, before the guidelines are released. After we scramble to meet the deadline, which is often a matter of weeks, it takes even longer to get a response, and all the while costs are rising. There needs to be a more efficient way to deal with grants, and cost increases need to be factored in. We need grants that are targeted at remote and rural communities. We need grants that are 100% funded or only require a minimal contribution. We need grants that address critical infrastructure, not just pretty things for political parties to have their name on. There needs to be mechanisms to obtain additional funding due to delays by the state or federal government departments. In conclusion, the current system is broken. We're not asking for handouts, we're asking for a fair go. It's time to recognise that one size does not fit all. And if the state and federal government expect us to carry the weight, then they must give us the means to do so. Until then, small councils like ours will continue to face an uphill battle with no end in sight. Councils are a perpetual entity and need to be funded sufficiently to achieve this in conjunction with our state and federal stakeholders. That's it, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Well done. Do you want to just expand on what you think that tiered approach would look like?
Well, it needs to be something so that the councils, as they were talking about before, in the city, people can charge parking fees, parking fines. Their halls and facilities are used a lot more. We can't do that on Flinders Island. We don't even charge for parking at our airport because the facilities and the staff needed would not make it worthwhile exercise for us. So we really cannot make money in the ways that larger councils can. And I think that needs to be something that is really taken into consideration when they are doing the formula for working out the FAGS grants.
Does local government association already have those, or do they just see everyone the same? Is there already segregation with those councils where there are either blurred or semi-permanent lines that border you being in one group or the other?
We're talking about the State Grants Commission, are we?
Oh,
And how they...
It's like that. I'm just trying to drill down on what that tier would look like by asking, are there any soft boundaries that already exist that could be adopted as a...
I don't think there are any that exist at this point, but I'm sure if someone was to go looking that things could be found.
Wherever you put the line,
Yeah.
whoever's on that side wants to be on that side.
Absolutely.
So I was just seeing if there wasn't something that was acceptable by all, that's
Not
a
at this-
document that we could use.
If we use the State Grants Commission as an exemplar, they've given their proportion of funding to allocate to their councils. They have some incredibly complicated formulas to try and apportion that fairly.
That's the FAGS as well. It's appropriated by the state
Yeah.
through that formula.
Yeah, indeed. And they do their best, but they have rules they have to meet as well. So we still, I think, have the case where a Launceston or a Hobart having greater capacity to levy fees and charges is pretty much self-sufficient without any grant funding, whereas we rely on it just to make it through the year.
It is 50% of our budget. So.
And our rate revenue just covers our staff costs, and we have very moderate staff costs. We have staff that have 5 functional areas. We have no specialists, we can't afford it. So they don't have that ability to build up the expertise to help us with grant applications, as an example. So we're always scrambling, I think is the best way to describe it.
Can we go to the definition of financial sustainability from your perspective?
From my perspective, financial sustainability is that we're able to deliver the services that the community needs, some of the services that the community wants, and do it in a way that our council, even though we are a perpetual entity, but that our council isn't consistently in the red. And unfortunately, I do believe that both the state and federal government do need to contribute more for that to happen.
And if we could complete our annual plan, which comes out of our strategic plan, that would be a good indicator that we were meeting our obligations to the community. And we certainly have carryovers every year.
And just, you mentioned 50% of your revenue is from grants?
Grants, yes.
So the rest is rates and
So-
some minimal fees and charges, is it?
Yes.
And-
2.6 is from rates.
And if there was more money available,
2.6%.
Sorry, 2.6 million
Oh,
is
sorry, yeah.
rates.
and did you just mention then that if there was more money available through the FAGS program, that you would put specialised grant writers on to increase your staff to ask for more grants?
That's one of the things we could consider. We don't have a compliance officer, we don't have a bylaws officer, we don't have bylaws. When you're talking about Flinders Council, you have to think extremely basic, and we're very remote. I know we're only 120 k's plus across the water, but we have been left alone or ignored since inception to varying degrees. Probably less ignored now And that's hurting us in that, okay, we have a compliance legacy that we have to meet, and we are miles behind. I'll give you some very quick examples. Our airport needs $3 million just to do a lighting upgrade. There is 30 kilometres of wiring in the ground. They didn't even put it in conduit, so it's just deteriorating. They haven't done drainage for 20 odd years, and so now the roads are deteriorating at a more rapid rate. What's another good example?
The tip.
Don't get me started on the tip. We accept our compliance responsibilities, but to go from where we are to where we need to be costs a lot of money. That our waste cellar's full, and we're getting quotes of 9 to 12 million to replace it. It's just completely beyond our capacity, and it's not politically attractive as far as grants or support from either level of government. So we're in a holding pattern.
And we have been told that our population size will be held against us when applying for competitive grants. We have just less than 1,000 people, and so governments aren't getting enough bang for buck in funding our projects, despite how critical they are.
So we're trying to be very proactive in the advocacy space, and we've increased our advocacy efforts significantly in the last year or so. We've been to Canberra twice. We're talking to senators from Tasmania and both political parties.
Heaps of them. Same as every state.
Indeed. But
Same number of senators as every state.
previously, it was just Bridget and no one else. But so we're widening it. We're looking at a PR company to help us just take our advocacy to the next level. We're trying to make our own luck, because if we sit on our hands, you can be assured nothing will change.
What's your main industry, Mayor?
Agriculture. Definitely cattle farming. We have around 20% of Tasmania's cattle herd, and we have around $100 million worth of cattle sold off the island every year, which is a huge...
Live export. Well,
live export to Tasmania and Melbourne, yes.
but you don't do the King Island sort of cheeses and
No.
don't do the dairy part.
They can do that bit.
But
We've
you
got our
are
own.
producing high quality cattle.
We are definitely.
No doubt.
90% is Angus, black Angus, which is quite a desirable,
Marketable product.
very much so. And we have lost a lot of our sheep. A lot of farmers are getting out of sheep just because of the cost involved, having to pay for shearers to come to the island. So a lot more people are focusing on cattle. That's definitely our main industry. But tourism is growing. Tourism is $10 to $12 million a year for our island, and definitely growing.
What does the tourists do when they get there? Because
Just,
I want to come.
they just switch off.
Yeah, great.
You have to be on Telstra to get a phone service on our island, so a lot of people find that quite beneficial, that they can literally not be contacted. We've got 72 beaches just on Flinders Island. As I said before, we've got 50 islands. You can't visit all of them. Some of them are just rocks. We've got a great distillery. We've got wines that are being produced on the island. Provided you get the right licences, you can go out and catch a rock lobster or get some abalone. There's things to do, but we are a more environment-based community, outdoorsy. You don't come to Flinders Island for barley. Yeah.
You got a high school?
We do have it's one school. It's kindergarten through to year 12. We have around 110 students, which is really great. At its low point, it got to about 60. I think at its high point in the 60s, it had almost 300 students. But no, we've got a school, and they're doing really great as well. They're consistently beating out other Tasmanian schools in various competitions, so that's really great as well.
Chair.
Sorry, Deputy Chair, I forgot you. Yep,
That's okay. I was just
go for it.
thank you, thanks, Chair. So Tony Passon, I'm the Deputy Chair. I'm getting horrible feedback, but I'll push through. Mayor Summers, I was on Flinders Island earlier in the year. I spent the day We've got a lovely cafe there, but I also was there looking at the state of the road network and a few other things. In my role as Assistant Shadow Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, I just have a few questions if I could. So you said the population of FC is under 1,000. Are you able to give me the actual number, or is it 950, or what are we talking about?
If we rely on the ABS data at the last census, it was 933. That would be our official one. But
And I saw here that your council wage expense bill was 2.91 billion. I think you mentioned the figure of 3. I think we're
Million,
not too
not
far. I said million.
sorry,
Yeah.
it sounded.
No, million's enough. Can you tell me what that converts to in terms of FTEs employed by the council?
Yep. So we have 27 FTEs and around 35 members of staff.
27 staff. Do you know how that compares as a benchmark to other comparably sized councils?
I couldn't answer that. It's not something that we've compared with other councils. All I could say is that I know King Island does have more staff, but I wouldn't be able to give you a number.
Yeah. One of the things I'm considering as part of this work is the need for councils to provide benchmarking data. Is that something that the Flinders Council would be open to doing? That is, comparable counts, like a series of indicia, so that we can get a sense of whether councils are at the benchmark, above the benchmark, below the benchmark.
I certainly have no problem in that information being provided.
Your overall revenue, I see, is about 6.5 million. Is that right? Between rates, other charges, FA?
Our budget is 7.8.
Right.
That was the 23-24.
I've got your operating revenue at 6.5 million in that period, so we're slightly different.
Sorry,
that's okay.
My budget includes our capital budget as well as our operating budget.
So, yeah, I'm just interested that close to $3 million in wage costs out of an operating budget of 6.5. Now, I'm interested about your airport. You say here that you've decided not to fund depreciation, as renewal funding has historically been secured by federal capital grants and is currently unachievable in the life of the plan. If you were to fund depreciation, what would that number be for the airport?
I'll let our general manager.
I'd have to come back to you on that one, I think. Yeah.
I would like to say that was just for the road, the runway that we aren't funding the depreciation for, because that was 100% funded by government grants.
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand the argument. It's an argument I've run in other places that we're asking local governments to depreciate assets that are very rarely funded by them in repair. If I could have that question answered on notice, what is the depreciation number for the Flinders Council Airport? Because what this would tell me is that you're operating on an operating deficit right now, but if you were to add depreciation for that asset in, it would just blow the deficit right the way out.
And it is a discussion that we have had with some when we have done advocating, is that we are allowed as that we should be allowed as a council to not depreciate particularly large items, especially where they have been funded by 100% grants. As an example, we've received over $4 million to build a safe harbour project that is coming along. And if we have to depreciate that, even over 50 years, that's still $100,000 a year that we're going to have to come up with, which for a council of our size is quite significant.
Can I ask, one of the things that discussed with me by locals while I was there was the cost of roadworks on the island because the materials are brought onto the island by sea. Is that I've never been able to ascertain whether that's accurate or not. Is that what occurs? Does aggregate come for road making over the port?
Sometimes we do have a gravel mine on the island that council owns that we get a significant amount of our gravel from. But when we're doing projects like road sealing, it does come from off island, and freight adds around. Sorry.
And is that, sorry, Madam Mayor, is that because the quality of the stone's not appropriate on the island, or?
Yeah, it's a various components.
Yes. So the stone comes off the island, the aggregate, but the bitumen in the liquid form needs to be heated, and that would come on a tanker.
Yeah.
No, that wasn't the question, Scotty. Thanks for your help. My information is that there is aggregate that comes in bulker bags across the port. Is that right?
I know there was a project many years ago where that happened, but it's certainly not something that's happened in my time on council.
Right, okay. I just wanted to know that I'll chase down that information because someone was pointing that out to me.
Sorry, Deputy Chair, Mr Groves just had something to add.
That did happen for a recent state growth sealing project, but it's not the norm.
Apologies.
And is that because they couldn't find appropriate quality aggregate on the island?
No, it was an assessment on their part of the relative cost of using on-island aggregate as opposed to if they'd brought it off island and brought it to, and it was still cheaper in their estimation to do it that way. So they
and so that was the state government managed, not a local government managed contract,
correct.
Was it?
Yeah, and what we normally do for further efficiencies is we backload their works so that we save on mobilisation and demobilisation of equipment and the like. So we do our resealing program when they do theirs and use the same contractor, that sort of thing.
I'll take my inquiry up with the Tasmanian government because I can't imagine that putting aggregate in bulker bags would be cheaper than quarrying it on the island. But that's a discussion I'll have with other people. Final question, if I could, for you, Madam Mayor, or for Mr. CEO. General Manager, I should say. You spoke about cost shifting. I've asked this question of a lot of councils. I'm familiar with lots of examples of cost shifting from state governments onto local government. I don't have very many examples of the federal government cost shifting on to local government. If you've got an example or examples, I'd happily hear them right now.
I'd say that the main one that I'd have is our airport. As I said in my opening statement, we were kindly gifted that back in the 90s. I believe, speaking to a councillor who was on council at that time, that it was a case of if council doesn't take it on, then it would basically not exist anymore. So we were sort of forced into taking that asset on, and we haven't been funded to maintain such a huge piece of infrastructure. In the meantime, as the General Manager was saying, there are issues with our lighting system at the moment that we're currently seeking $3 million to repair. Our runways all need to be redone. They do hamper our ability to have larger aircraft come in. We have a lot of expressions of interest from Sydney and Brisbane to bring 70 or 80 seat aircraft, but our pavement does not allow frequent landings of planes of that size at this point. So that's a quite major example of cost shifting from the federal government. For us, most of our other ones are state government, but I mean, I think climate change is something that the federal government needs to have more input into when it comes to local government. Being an island, rising waters, flooding, bushfires are just something that's happening more and more for us. And again, it's not something that as a small council that we're able to mitigate any of the climate change issues coming in. And
It's not for you, it's for me.
oh, okay, sorry. But one of the issues that we are facing as a result of climate change is rising insurance It's gone up nearly 100% just in recent years due to bushfires and happening on the mainland. And as a council, we're having to cover increased insurance premiums because of that. So I think that's certainly something from a federal perspective that has been forced onto local government.
Sure. Could I, on notice, I appreciate this question of the airport and has come up both on depreciation and the need to fund. Could I ask the Flinders Council to give me a schedule of the current works that are required at the airport and perhaps any funding that's been provided to the airport over the last 10 years? That's on notice. And then final question, has the Flinders Council made application to the various rounds of the regional airports program? Which is the program, competitive program that is available for these kind of infrastructure projects?
No, we haven't. When this project came around, we had the round 10 was about to be announced. I'm sure it was round 10. When the guidelines came out, it said that it was only 50% funded. To receive 100% funding, you had to be an Aboriginal-owned or managed airport, which we aren't. For us, that meant that we would have had to have come up with $1.5 million, which was not possible. We had to show that we would be able to pay that as part of the grant application, so we decided not to proceed with that. After advocating in Canberra, we met with Minister Catherine King, and she encouraged us to apply for the grant in the next round regardless of that. Even though we aren't able to make that 50% contribution, she still encouraged us to apply. That was in May, and we're still waiting for the regional and remote airport programs to open.
Yeah, and we're currently preparing an application to the, I think it's Growing Regions Fund. We were still going to come up with 10%, which is 300,000, which is still a fairly significant impost.
Not better than 50.
And just on that, just on that, if I could.
Last one, Deputy Chair.
Yep, very last one. You said the airport operates in the deficit. Do you charge landing fees? And if you do, how much are they, and how much is the annual deficit, the operation deficit at the airport?
We do charge landing fees. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what they are, but in our discussions with our airline providers, they're very much of the opinion that we can't go much higher. And we're currently anywhere between 750 and 900,000 is what we're subsidising the airport each year.
Sorry, 750. Does that include depreciation?
No.
So you spend $750,000 to $900,000 per year more than you earn in revenue from the airport.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
On notice, could I have a breakdown of what those costs are?
Yes.
I look, if that's real, that's wow. It's a lot of money.
Thanks, Deputy
And I
Chair.
accept it's real.
Thank you. There's only a little bit of time remaining. Can I just, at the risk of flogging a dead horse about the airport, it's really important infrastructure for the island. Is the lighting upgrade necessary for 24-hour operation, or
Absolutely.
So you don't have planes landing in the evening now?
We do. We do have planes. Not always every day. We have the RFDS.
So there is some form of lighting. Yeah, that's where I was going. So emergency medical evacuation flights can land at the moment?
At the moment.
It's not ideal.
It's not ideal. As Warren was saying earlier, there is a large amount of cabling that's just been buried in the ground. At any minute, that could fail. Our switchboard dates from World War II. We cannot get any spare parts for that. the last time we repaired it about 2 years ago, it was like, that's it, there's no more. It needs to be updated. At the moment, the lights, when they're put on at night for the RFDS, sometimes there are night flights that arrive. Apparently we have Department of Defence training that happens at night. We have search and rescue that happens. There's been fishermen who have gone overboard when there's bushfires. We do use it at night, and our airport staff have to monitor the ampage as they're putting the lights on to ensure it doesn't go too high and just kill the whole system. In an ideal world, we would just replace the cabling or just replace the switchboard. But with CASA regulations, as soon as you touch one thing, you have to bring everything up to standard.
Right.
And now they have...
The 3 million covers it, just to be
3
clear.
million will cover that.
Right.
Up until the end, the quote that we've received remains valid until the end of October.
Yep.
And then it'll have to be requoted. So hopefully it won't have gone up too much, but you never know.
Can I encourage you to take whatever the minister said to you, and apply?
Oh, we will be.
Yeah,
Most
great.
definitely.
We appreciate that with a small council staff that you're wearing many hats, but that'd be a good place to focus your time and energies for sure. I'm not sure if you're aware, Scotty, but a mate of mine has sea kayaked from Wilson's Promontory all the way to Tassie, and there's only one time where you can't see land for a period of about 10 kilometres. So you're paddling, and it's you can't see the next bit. But there are lots and lots of islands, and they all belong to your council.
They do.
Even the one just off the coast of Wilson's Prom. Yep. It's extraordinary.
It'd be really good if we could get funding for a marine department, so we can go out and visit all these islands. But that's never going to happen.
So how many islands are habited?
So Flinders Island is the main one. We have Cape Barren Island, which has around 80 residents. It's a largely Aboriginal island. In our whole community, we have 17% Aboriginal, which is the second highest in Tasmania. And
is there an Aboriginal corporation?
We've actually got two.
Right.
So we've got the Flinders Island Aboriginal Association and Cape Barren Island Aboriginal Association, who council liaises with to better serve our communities. And then there are a few privately owned islands which have some people living on them. One of the things that we try to do is limit development on the outer islands. We don't want big resorts or anything out there. Because again, our community likes our island for what it currently offers. We don't want to be the next Bali.
But the community does want a tourism industry, though. So what needs to be done in order for these flights to come in direct from the East Coast? Do you need a new pavement, or do you need an extended runway? What do you need?
I don't think the runway will be extended. We do need a new pavement. The current runway has water that pools on it when it's rained, so that all has to be sort of like swept off before our current planes can land. So the whole thing just needs to be re-engineered, and it needs to have a thicker asphalt top put on it
And that will allow heavier planes with greater payloads to land
more often.
more
I
efficiently.
can understand why you don't want to become a new Bali, but that high-end tourism sector might be, at least partial answer to some of your financial sustainability issues. Yeah.
It could be. It's important for us to have. It's not about visitors bringing money to the island as much as we like that. We want people who want to come to the island and appreciate it for what it is. We did a really big project quite recently called the Island Away, which was about regenerative tourism, making sure that people are coming to the island for the right reasons and that they're able to give back if they want to. If you want to come and sit on a beach and read a book for 2 weeks, well, you can, but if you want to get involved, if you want to be pulling out box thorn or something like that and giving back to the community, then that can happen as well.
Fantastic. Let's wrap it there unless you've got any final points you want to make. But you've covered a lot of ground there. Well done. And thanks to committee members for your questions. So there are some additional information that's been requested by the committee. If you can please forward that to the Secretary by the 11th of October. It's about 3 weeks, I think, roundabout. If you can't get it all by then, no worries, just let us know. And
Certainly get it before you by then.
we'll send you a copy of the transcript of the evidence from today, so you'll have an opportunity to request corrections to any transcription errors. But really appreciate your time and thanks for flying over. And the Deputy Chair's been there. I hope to get there one day as well. Sounds beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We'll pause the hearing now for lunch, but if we can reconvene at 1 sharp, that'd be great. So it's still an hour, but just 15 minutes earlier than the program suggests. Sorry, now
Thanks,
we'll
Chair.
pause it.
When he's going back to the island, I've got.
We let everyone. We may have. The Deputy Chair is coming in on. Website, and the proof and official transcripts of proceedings will be published on the inquiry website. Those present here today are advised that filming and recording are permitted during the hearing. I remind members of the media, though, of the need to fairly and accurately report the proceedings of the committee. I invite members of the committee to introduce yourselves. Luke Gosling, I represent Darwin and Palmerston in the Northern Territory and chair the committee. We might have the Deputy Chair, Tony Passon, on the phone, or he'll be calling in shortly. Scotty
Buchholz from Queensland, southeast corner.
So I now call on representatives of Break O'Day Council and Circular Head Council to give evidence. For the Hansard record, can you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee? Ladies first.
Mrs. Vanessa Adams, General Manager, Circular Head Council.
Jared Blizzard, Mayor, Circular Head Council.
John Brown, General Manager, Break O'Day Council.
And is that you, Deputy Chair?
It is, Chair.
Can you just introduce yourself, please?
I'm Tony Passon, the Federal Member for Barker and Assistant Shadow Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. It's a bit loud where I am, so I'll put myself on mute.
No problems. We've our witnesses have just introduced themselves. We've got Vanessa Adams, GM, Circular Head Council, the Mayor of Circular Head Council, Jared Blizzard, and also John Brown from Break O'Day Council, GM. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses of Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to a discussion. The opening statement is just an opportunity to get in the main points you want us, our committee, to take away, and and then we'll just go into some Q&A after that. Can I, at the outset though, thank you both for putting in submissions. We were very keen to hear from your councils in particular, because you did go to that, go to the time and effort of putting in a submission, and we very much appreciate that. So this is an opportunity to, let us know what the most important things you want us to take away in terms of financial sustainability for local government, and some of the unique challenges that you have in your parts of this beautiful state of our great nation. Did Circular Head want to go first?
Yep. Thank you for the opportunity to outline to the committee our position and thoughts to local government sustainability. If it pleases the committee, I'll make a couple of opening remarks and hand over to Vanessa, who will give me more detailed and comprehensive presentation.
Thanks, Mayor.
Like a number of rural regional councils, we have a large land area with a low rate base. This creates a number of issues and impacts directly on the number of areas in maintaining our municipality. These include, but are not limited to, we have the same responsibility as large councils to maintain all the regulatory matters within the council, maintaining our road network, the extra services in the social area we're required to provide. I accept in rural committees that local council is probably the best place to deliver many of these services, but we need reasonable resourcing to do so. As it is, our community team punch well above their weight in these areas. Staff recruitment, another issue, especially in the higher skilled areas. I'm proud of our community and what we contribute to Tasmania's economy and what our council and its staff deliver, but the challenges in many areas continue to grow. Thank you again, and I'll now hand over to Vanessa.
Thank you. And again, thank you for the opportunity. I expect the key themes that we're going to share with you today are probably not new to you, but we value the opportunity to reiterate the situation in rural and remote areas. Briefly, a bit of context. We have a population of just over 8,000, living in 5,025 rateable dwellings, an area of just under 5,000 square kilometres and a road network of 768 kilometres. This is the largest local authority maintained road network in Tasmania per capita. We also maintain 111 bridges, of which 30 are currently still timber, and we have a staff of 76. Our primary industries of dairy and beef farming and forestry contributed around 823 million to the economy in 2022. And currently our population is projected to decrease by 2053, although we're keen to turn that around. The role of local government is evolving to encompass services to people with an increased expectation that we support local wellbeing, resilience and connectedness. And we believe we're well placed to carry out a connective, coordinating and facilitative role in this important national priority. It's not a legislated role, it's one we stepped into over time, perhaps more so in rural areas. And we're stepping up in our understanding as a result of market factors related to distance and population size, which deter for-profit providers, and we understand that. And secondly, due to a lack of policy and funding coordination, and I'd like to give you some examples. I've got two. The first is mental health services. Our key community service organisations were running overlapping programmes without any idea of what the others were doing and competing for funding. Without Council having stepped in over the last 2 years as an independent non-service provider to map services and bring organisations together, this would still be the case. Our community is reliant on funded outreach programmes delivered by larger organisations that are based elsewhere. So currently, Circular Head has 12 services providing face-to-face support programmes or services. At least 2 of them choose not to advertise their services as they're overprescribed at their base organisation and are at capacity locally. One service is funded to provide a day a week and another funded to provide a bit more on a different day, and so on, often through remote or online referral systems, resulting in complexity that is tricky for a healthy person to navigate, never mind someone in need of mental health support. These services are not linked in any way and operate independently, so it has been the health service mapping we've provided that has been able to draw this information together to create and distribute as a resource for the community. And we have a temporary grant-funded resource doing this work. We take every opportunity to advocate to and inform other levels of government about local circumstances. However, the increasing expectation that local government will support health and wellbeing is not accompanied by an acknowledgement that new responsibilities require more resources. There's an assumption that we'll just make it happen, and we do, but not without trading on goodwill and stretching our people above and beyond what ought to be the norm. The second example is that, as I expect you may be aware, Tasmania has recently established a child safe framework. While the sector was consulted, responsibility for implementing and administering the child safe framework has landed on us, with little attention paid to issues of resourcing and capability that were consistently raised by us during consultation. So we were consulted, but we feel that we weren't heard. And we're now scrambling to put policy and guidance in place, even as it is being developed by a new regulator who was in the job very shortly in advance of the legislation actually coming into effect. We work in this sector because we're passionate about our communities. It is incredibly frustrating, therefore, and I imagine this is common to rural, remote and regional communities across Australia, that we're constantly stitching together a threadbare patchwork quilt of services to wrap around our community. So I guess that's the opening statement. I also have more to say about skills and financial sustainability, infrastructure provision, and a summary, but I think rather than...
Sure.
I'll just answer as we go, if that's all right.
Yeah, just a point of clarification, was a child health framework?
Child safe framework.
Child safe framework.
So it's about the child safety and preventing abuse.
And is that partially about having a card to say that you're
It's not.
okay to work with children?
No, that's obviously an element of it, but it's a lot more than that. It's about how do agencies and entities ensure that they are operating in a way that minimises the risk to children, that keeps them safe, that gives young people a say in how they're engaged with. And because we have wide-ranging operations that touch on young people, and we lease out facilities to clubs and groups, it's obviously quite a concern that we don't have the ability to directly instruct a group that may be leasing a facility to make sure they're operating in a child-safe manner. And we've said to them, this is what you need to be abiding by now. There's a child safe framework. Here's the link to it. Please make sure. Their peak bodies haven't necessarily been as up to speed in helping them do that. Yeah. And there is an expectation in the legislation here that councils will have a resource dedicated to this. Well,
But not funded.
Not funded at all. And obviously we're working on it. We've just adopted this month's council meeting our policy and statement, but there are 10 standards that we have to adhere to, and we're working our way through them. The regulator's been very supportive, but this is on top of everything else that we're doing. Now, I don't want to whinge. We're perfectly willing to do our best for our communities, but there are a number of things in the air, and you chuck one up, catch another one, chuck it up. And it all just feels like this is unnecessarily trading on people's goodwill, people working long hours to get these things done.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
Mr. Chair. Thank you. And appreciate the opportunity to attend today.
We appreciate you driving over.
That's okay. It was a lovely drive. Apologies from our Mayor. He is tied up with his president of the Local Government Association, so he's somewhere between here and Canberra at the moment. So. But anyway, look, thank you for the opportunity. Just a quick picture of Break a Day. We are about 7,000 people, 3,800 square kilometres. We are the opposite side of Tasmania's northern coastline to Circular Head. We're at the northern end of the east coast of Tasmania. There is a lot of similarities to our colleagues on the far western corner in terms of number of bridges, where we've got 110. We've got a similar number of personnel. We're a little bit smaller at 3,800 square kilometres, and we've got about 550 kilometres of road. Make an observation just in relation to remoteness, which is just slightly unknown to many people in Tasmania and our larger island to the north, in that Breakaday is not remote, we're regional, yet Queenstown on the west coast is remote and is closer to the nearest major population centre than St Helens. It's closer to the capital city than we are, yet we're not remote, even though we're further away. And this is
According to
ARIA Plus classification and the modified Monash model, which operates through the federal government. That's the point we've raised, the inequities in relation to this, but unfortunately over the last 4 years we haven't made too much headway, but it will be great to see a review of that classification system happen. We put it down to one thing, it's our population. We've got less schools in Queenstown, we've got the same number of hospitals and aged care facilities, but we've got a bigger population. So that must be what the mystery of it is to us. But anyway, moving on from that, in terms of the comments our colleagues from Circular Head have made regarding delivery of allied health and related services, totally endorse those observations. We're in the same space of providing leadership in bringing services together so they actually talk to each other and to try and minimise some of the duplication overlap that occurs there as well. We talk about how our regional communities, expectations of our communities on what the council will deliver. And outside of our cities, the expectations on councils are far broader. And for example, things like, I'll just go to a number of years ago, the local breast screening service was going to be discontinued in our area, vital piece within our community. That wouldn't happen in Launceston or Hobart. The expectations were that the council would fight to retain that service, which we did and we were successful. But when you think about the larger population centres, they have the major not-for-profits there, they have government agencies, everything is there. When you go to the councils further out, we have to fill that void. We're that first point of contact for our communities, which comes with a cost, but it also means that we are very much in touch with how our communities are operating and what their needs are. Workforce challenges, yep, it's been flagged. We'll talk about that a little bit too. In terms of the challenges that we face, population, we are an ageing community. In fact, we're hyper-ageing on the coast, and we work with Tasmania's leading demographer, Dr. Lisa Denny, in relation to understanding our population. She likens our projections by 2053 as a population tornado. Now, if you look, and that's not a good description, when you think about the shape of a tornado, that's what we look like. 9% of our population will be over 85 years of age. Think about the implications for the in-home care packages and the aged care. We need to intervene to build our working age population. So that's where, as a council, we've been drawn into, and very willingly drawn into, a state government initiative, which is a regional jobs hub network. I'll declare an interest here. I'm actually chair of the Breakaday Employment Connect, which covers the Dorset, Breakaday and half of Glamorgan Spring Bay council areas. So we've got the north-east corner and half the east coast to look after. The initiative, it's very much place-based and focused on employment solutions. We're about quality outcomes for employment. We're about addressing barriers to employment as well. Interestingly, when you look at our statistics, and this reflects the network around Tasmania, 85% of our clients are non-Centrelink registered. It's filling a void. The federal government, the Department of Employment, I'm unsure of their correct name, looking very closely at what's happening in Tasmania. In fact, it featured in the white paper. This particular solution here in Tasmania is actually filling a bit of a gap in the employment market. So we have to provide this leadership, which is very satisfying actually to see us creating a different future for our communities as well. So that's very much regionally based. So colleagues to the northwest, they're covered under West Northwest Working as well, which covers, I think, they've got about 5 local government areas to look after in that area. So it's quite a big bit of employment. Importantly, we've also got a youth jobs focus as well. So this is about that transition of our younger population leaving school and entering the workforce. Our education system does their work, but they need assistance to make that transition, and this is part of providing an effective transition across into the labour market as well. So that's an example of how regional councils are getting drawn into that broader societal type issue there as well. In relation to our submission, just a couple of key points in there and draw attention. No doubt the committee have looked at the submissions and that, but just noting financial assistance grants, I couldn't not mention the financial assistance grants. You've probably heard it many, many times, but won't hurt to hear it again, is that when you look at our percentage of the funding pool, that we receive 2.2% of the actual pool, and that you look at GS2 distribution and it's 3.9%. for Tasmania, so I wonder where the other 1.7% goes, but we won't get into the argument that Western Australia have about Tasmania having too much GS2 revenue. I'll stay away from that one. I'll just play the cards as they are there as well. But noting that those untied grants are really important elements of local government sustainability, and whilst the federal government has committed to fair increases in GS2, in their financial assistance grants, it's all a matter of definition as to what fair increases are, and the sector's consistently advocated for the restoration to 1% of GS2. We've got a way to go with our fair increases to achieve that. Happy to leave the workforce challenge piece and talk further collectively if you'd like to do that as well. Got a few points to make on that one.
Thank you. Just a point of definition, just we're really keen to get all the witnesses to sort of reflect on what financial sustainability looks like. So how would you define it? Each council, how would you define financial sustainability?
So from our perspective, there are a couple of key pieces in that as well. Firstly, it depends on your underlying surplus. Once you strip out all the accounting treatments and everything, what's it really look like? And we've taken a position that a position of comfort, and that is to have a surplus of 500,000 per year. The reason for taking that position of comfort is to give us the flexibility to be able to initiate activities and to do work for the community. Other piece comes down to the funding of asset renewal. We need to be funding depreciation at 100% to have a sustainable asset base there as well. Typically, we're probably running, I think this year we're 68% in our financials, so a little bit under. But equally too, we're looking closely at the condition of our assets, because I have an issue with accounting treatments. I do have an accounting background. I know accountants can be creative in the way their figures look. No disrespect to accountants, being one myself, but depreciation varies. We, as I've said to the Future Local Government Review Board, we're not comparing apples with apples. We need to compare pink lady apples with pink lady apples, and we're not doing that to have comparisons between councils. So clarity around that. So funding of asset depreciation. So your assets do not reduce in condition over a period of time. You are spending enough on asset renewal to keep it going. So those are the two simple ones for us: is sufficient cash from our operations to meet our needs and to make sure our assets are maintained in an appropriate condition for our community, and we're not going to set it up where we're ripping up roads because we can't maintain that condition, which we see unfortunately in other areas of Australia. That's my piece.
Defining and measuring financial sustainability.
Well, for us, financial sustainability looks a little different because we are in an underlying deficit at the moment. We have a small rate base, large road network, major industries that use that road network quite heavily. So you've got milk tankers, you've got the beef trucks and the forestry, the logging vehicles. And what we don't want to do is to have to keep raising rates. So what else can we look at? We are one of the things we've asked for is a proportion of direct revenue from royalties and rates being returned to councils, and that exemptions from rates for renewable energy be removed. So we're actively pursuing that with the Tasmanian Valuer General, mind you, but the ability, we don't at the moment have the ability to rate renewable energy production on private land. So turbines on private land are leased and they're classed as chattels, which in theory are to be removed at the end of the lease, which means we can't rate them. So if we could rate them, then that would reduce the need for rate increases, ease the community burden and support our financial sustainability. And we are also look, we acknowledge that many state and federal funding streams are aimed at regional communities, but more often than not, we don't apply due to the requirement for co-funding. It's as simple as that, because if there's a grant stream for $500,000 to do something and it requires, which you generally do, another inhibitor, but lesser one, is the resource required to identify a grant, write the bid and acquit it. But it's also important to note that if we do go for a grant and we're successful, the time it takes to get the money, allied to the volatile construction environment, sometimes results in a gap between what we've identified and what we get when we get it, and then we have to sort of look at pruning the project scope, or find some money.
Good point.
Yeah. Well, and look, we acknowledge that government obviously needs to be responsible with its funding, and you can't just chuck money, but is there a way to tighten up that time frame somehow?
On the back of that point, given that both of you mentioned your similar types of bridges in your demographic, the bridge renewal program, it's a co-contribution of 50%, and if without that program you'd have the whole 100%. Did you use that program?
We have used it, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
We actually borrowed about 10 years ago, 15 to lead into it, but also a program to go to permanent structure. So we now have over 90% of our bridges are concrete, and it's questionable whether any of the others will go beyond concrete, go to concrete, because they might be leading to a farm. One bridge, one user. So say, really? Yeah. Where's that return? So certainly the bridges renewal program, that was great. The local roads.
Yes.
It is.
Yeah. The local roads and community infrastructure program, which came out as a COVID relief, that was great because there wasn't the matching requirements. We had the flexibility to take it across a range of activities, which I'm sure all councils flexed in that regard. So that was a fantastic program, that one. So that's the value of some of those targeted, semi-targeted, untied top grants, but completely agree regarding the 50% contribution on some of those things. You just look and say, we're out of this because of that requirement there as well. So the flexibility, and that's, for me, that's also where that ARIA plus remote regional classification system, everything seems to be focused around that, and that's where that 50% requirement comes into it, because we can go hour and a half down the road to Swansea, which is in our neighbouring one for south, which is halfway to Hobart, and they're remote. They're remote, which affects a whole range of things. So,
Allocation of doctors.
yeah, they're closer. Yeah, and funding of nursing homes, they come at MMA7, 1.5-7, whereas the Parkers and St Helens is 5, has massive impact there as well. So that's like, we just shake our heads a bit on this one. But anyway, that's what it is.
Sorry.
Yeah, there's just one thing, if I may, I'd like to mention that impacts on Tasmanian councils. We think it's fiercely inequitable that some charges are collected by other levels of government but not distributed equitably to sustain the thing it is being charged for. This is probably more of a state thing than federal, but something you ought to be aware of. Heavy vehicle tax. It's designed to recover road construction and maintenance costs. And as I said, in our area with heavy tankers and log trucks, we're subsidising road access. It's not a component of the financial assistance grant pool. And the sum allocated to councils in Tasmania, 1.5 million per annum, divided amongst all 29 councils, has not increased since 1996-97, whilst the total heavy vehicle tax collected by the state has grown from an estimated 32.1 million to 92.6 million, which is a 23-24 budget figure. That's a 288% increase, but a zero increase in the local government share. Now, I will say that Circular Head Council gets about 23% of the pot, but it's 23% of a very small pot that hasn't increased in the last 27 years. And if that were to be distributed equitably, that would go a long way to ease the current burden of road maintenance and again act to minimise rate increases that we have to pay for it. As I said, that's probably more a state issue, but it's something I would like you to be aware of as, you know, a funding thing that then makes us more sustainable and reduces the burden.
Can I? So, there wouldn't be a politician in Canberra that's not aware of the Local Government Association's 1% push. You know what I mean?
Yes,
and
I'm sure.
it's been around for. Can I ask, what in the program or in the advocacy that you're making to state government, how much are you asking them for in an equally concerted effort?
Well, we're asking, in terms of the heavy vehicle tax, we're asking for it to be, it's an estimated 0.03% revenue reduction to the state's forecast in 23-24 general revenue. So it's got to be a win-win to distribute that back out to councils to help maintain the roads, and therefore the money we're not spending on doing that can go to other community services, or indeed workforce challenges, which no doubt we'll come on to. We haven't talked yet about an infrastructure charging system, which we don't yet have in Tasmania, which would again help too.
Yeah. So the very point around the increase in that heavy vehicle user contribution is an active point of discussion between the Local Government Association and the state government. It's part of the advocacy they've had for a number of state budgets is a review and a restoration of a reasonable percentage there. So to get a 288% increase will be great. To get a 200% increase would be pretty good too.
Something. We're told it's under consideration.
It's under consideration, and in the context of the state and what they receive, it's a very important point to understand that it is for the more regional remote councils a really important piece. Like we have a lot of plantation in our area as well. There's actually 1,000 kilometres of roads related to plantation and parks and wildlife in our area, and we do get a bit of a push to look after a few of them, and we do politely say, if you pay us. But certainly the impact of heavy vehicles in some areas are more pronounced than others, and I certainly don't envy the impact Circular Head have got. We get about 5% of the pool. We get about 50,000 per year from that. A lot of that is due to we've got coal mine in our area, and they use a kilometre of road for one of their main collieries as well. So,
I think what Scott's getting at is that there's cost shifting that happens from state down to local government. Are you advocating to state government that, you know, perhaps as well as financial assistance grants from the Commonwealth, there's areas that they could help, other areas that they could help with?
yeah, certainly through, if we look at the outcome, well, the future local government review, which the state government haven't yet responded to the final report on, the issue of cost shifting and from state to local was a key feature within that, and a lot of submissions from councils around that. So you talk about the Child and Youth Safe Framework piece, like, yes, that's a vital piece, but the amount of cost the councils are incurring to implement that framework from a resource point of view is quite significant there as well. We see it when it comes to a lot of the regulatory activities. Any changes in regulatory activities that impact builders, developers, that sort of thing, flows to council. The state makes legislation, as you're well aware, we have to administer that as well. So we'll pick up that sort of thing. There's changes happening now in building which will have a further cost increase on councils there as well. But we're finding that leadership within state government makes it very difficult at times to operate in an effective manner, but I'm not sure how we fix that. And that's not talking about Parliament, I'm talking about the bureaucracy in there as well. So, but yes, if they can push something onto local government to deal with, and that can be created through a vacuum. Health services are one piece. We're very heavy in the community wellbeing space and supporting our community in that way as well. But a lot of these other challenges, housing, being actively involved in development of housing projects to meet, say, affordable or employee type accommodation demands are all part of the heavy lifting that local government's now having to deal with.
In your submission, you talked about reviewing the financial assistance grant distribution methodology, and we just spoke about it earlier, but do you have any suggestions on an alternate methodology for both councils?
Look, I think we've argued with a lot of the methodology in the past. They have a number of adjustment factors in there. Tourism was one that, and each state has a different methodology to chop up the pie once they get it. I think for us in the submission, it's about the size of the pie to start with. Then when we get down to state level, it's a bit about the methodology, about how they carve up the bit that they're given. So, and that's about the adjustment factors. So they talk about regional dispersal, tourism. Like we, as an economy, the east coast of Tasmania is the second most dependent on tourism in Australia. So I think the Gold Coast is the only one in front of us now, but we're second most dependent on tourism in Australia. So they take the tourism adjustment factor out. So we get penalised because they've decided they can't measure tourism influx or the variations between the different council areas, which we've pointed out is incorrect, and provide them with a method to do that based around data that's collected through the Tasmanian Visitor Survey. They could do it, but they don't want to. So the argument here is around the size of the pie to start with, and then we drill down into the arguments with the state around their methodology around how they sort out the bit between councils. I think they've done a lot of work in recent times, and I think they're not far off the money when they get to carve up the pie. There's obviously winners and losers. I think we're a bit of a loser at the moment, but the methodology is sound from what I can see and understand of it. But it's the size
Just
of the...
for clarity, you think you're a bit of a loser at the moment, not you, the council, because you're not sort of being compensated for the amount of tourists and the infrastructure.
That's part of it.
Yeah.
Part of it, but also they've just changed some of the underlying methodology, which has seen some shifts between different councils, and that's we've taken a little bit of a loss, but the methodology seems sound for us. As much as we don't like to see the loss, we've got to accept that the approach that they've taken. I'm not sure what happened with Circular Head with their the recent review, but it comes down to the size of the pie to start with.
And I think we all recognise that you don't have an endless supply of money, and that the solutions probably aren't as simple as just throwing more money into the pie. So one of the things for us is that grant funding streams often dry up just as the initiative is beginning to show impact. So longer term funding streams. And I guess we would also say phase down, the fixed term competitive grants, simply because they're difficult for us to access, and increase the recurrent untied revenue instead. And establish effective infrastructure charging systems across Australia, because I think, we don't have that developer contribution scheme here at the moment, and I think that's one key thing that would probably help in terms of infrastructure and sustainability. And as I've said, if grants could be the time frame between asking for and getting a successful grant could somehow be tightened. I understand, responsibility and bureaucracy and everything, rather than necessarily indexing the grant to cover that cost. Because I think one of the things that happens in rural areas is that we have less levers than urban councils to pull to generate funding, like pay parking, for example. But also we are vulnerable. We have to contract out a lot of our capital works, and so we're very vulnerable to rising construction costs, but also we are noticing a trend of losing staff to big projects. They get more money, and that's with more renewables coming, we can see that's a trend that's potentially going to increase, that some of our outdoor crew will go to a construction project that may be able to offer them a lot more money, and that then has an impact on our own capacity to do what we need to do. So
Could I just ask,
Yeah.
Mrs. Adams, is that building wind?
yes, it's in
Turbines.
our area it's predominantly wind turbines. So we are we've got 3 in the pipeline at the moment, and none of them has yet actually started construction, but they're talking about short-term workforces of 400 to 600 people needed to actually construct these things.
And they pay pretty well.
They do, yes. We've had people seduced away to the mines on the west coast by massive sign-on bonuses and higher salaries, and we can't compete. That goes across into wider workforce issues. I have, for example, I've actually got my executive assistant is catching dogs for us now, because we've advertised for a ranger 4 times and we haven't got anybody. We had a very good potential recruit from Victoria, but when he realised the scope of what he'd needed to be doing here, he's doing less of a broad job in Victoria and getting more money for it. So he said, thanks, but no thanks. So my executive assistant, and I have made sure he's trained, but it's only basic training. He's going out and catching dogs. Sorry, can't do the minutes. I've got to go and get a dog.
How do they catch them?
I'm sorry?
How do they catch them?
With love and tidbits, mostly. If it's a dangerous dog, then we're having to leave it to the police, obviously. But a dog...
Treats, food, basically.
Yeah. I mean, fortunately, 90% of the dogs are actually not dangerous and therefore can be safely caught. But if it's a dangerous dog, then we have a contractor that comes up from the coast, so he's 2 hours drive away. And we did have an incident a couple of months ago where, unfortunately, a couple of children were bitten on the way to school, needing serious stitches, and the police had to be involved.
And how are your insurance costs going? Is that a challenge for financial sustainability?
Insurance, well, we've noticed, interesting that you should ask that, because we've noticed that insurers are starting to ask about council's climate planning. So are you taking account of potential for climate change in your planning? Where's your climate change strategy? With the subtext seems to be that if you're not taking it seriously, your insurance premiums might go up. And I guess I can understand their point of view, and we are starting to plan for the potential of climate change to impact on our coasts and our rivers.
But in reality, what are they talking about? Building flood levees?
They're not
tanks, or-
talking, the insurers have not said, we expect you to do X, Y and Z. They've just said, look, are you thinking about this? Are you taking it into account in your plans to maintain your infrastructure into the future? And we're thinking, well, we're at early days and we haven't really got a lot of resource to put to it, but we better start thinking about it because we don't want our insurance premiums to go up.
There's a situation, and we'll go to Tony soon, but there's a situation in Queensland, in Charleville, where the community used to get flooded quite regularly. So considerable debt to the council, and coupled with some other grant money, they went and, on advice, got all the hydrology reports and put a levee around the community. No one was flooded. Their insurance premiums went up 75%.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, just so the rest of the councils up there were just looking at it and say, why bother?
Why bother?
Why bother?
Good point, Scott, thanks. Deputy Chair, did you want to ask any questions at this point?
No, I'm fine, thanks, Chair.
Cool. Sorry, you were going to say something, John?
Just going to make a point there, Chair, just in relation to the climate change element. So obviously focus on new infrastructure predominantly, making sure that if we've got sea level rise or something like that, that we are considering the position of infrastructure. Yep. There's a really important piece in relation to the National Disaster Relief Arrangements, which federal state arrangements, and they are moving towards enabling betterment to occur. So when we look at these arrangements, it's all about reinstate what you had to start with. So if you had a bridge that gets washed away every time it floods, and that happens every year for 3 years, so be it. Why not build the bridge so it doesn't get washed away? Now, previously under the arrangements, that couldn't happen. So anything the inquiry can do to support building resilient infrastructure through betterment. I think betterment's there. It just needs to be emphasised that betterment is a vital piece of building resilient communities here. Unfortunately, on the coast, we're subject to natural disaster events more than any other area in Tasmania, and I'll say that, and I could back it up with figures around bushfires and floods, etc. Like, for example, in February, we had a rain bomb. It sat over an area which was basically about 15 kilometres deep and 20 kilometres up and down the coast. Sat over St Helens, we had 60,000 lightning strikes in a 6-hour period. We had 200 mil of rain in that same period. And just sat over the Georges Bay St Helens and just dumped. So we're the only
fires as well, or then start fires as well.
No, because
too much rain.
It's too much.
Yeah.
But we've had 3 declared events this year.
Wow.
So, and they haven't got fire season yet. Thankfully, touch wood, since 2000 we haven't had a major bushfire yet. But we do have very mature emergency management response systems in there as well. But certainly the issue of climate change impact on insurance premiums, we're seeing that change there as well. But how we respond to these through our infrastructure builds, etc., maintenance of roads, etc., looking what we can do to make them more resilient to these events. Roadside drainage is a big thing. It's a bit like an optional extra, but having really effective roadside drainage enhances the resilience of your roads there as well.
Big one.
A big one, yeah.
If there was a vehicle for an increase in fags, how many extra staff could you just put on?
Look, straight up, like if we had the funding just to properly maintain our road infrastructure with roadside drainage, etc., bearing in mind we've got 550 kilometres and you need to maintain your bridges as well. We've actually had, just recently, a concrete bridge damaged by fire underneath it. It's going to cost us about 120k to fix it because it's a pretty big bridge. So you think they're bulletproof, they're not bulletproof. We could quite easily have another 10 people just maintaining the basics on our infrastructure without a shadow of a doubt, with sufficient funding. And that doesn't require a massive increase. It's great that the federal government is doubling the roads component of those financial grants, but it's doubling off a low base. We're going to go to, just remembering we were 500, we'll go to $1 million, so we're picking up about $500,000 there as well. But with the cost increases, we'll be able to do a better job, but if it doubled on top of that, we could do something serious about our road networks as well, which is probably getting closer to that 1% overall. So it would create a lot of employment. I think within the submission, we talk about the effectiveness of local government and getting value for money out of each dollar from an employment perspective. It would have a significant employment outcome. But I think being competitive in the labour market, that's a real challenge. We struggle in recruitments as well. The issue when you've got competitors like wind farms, we're going to see that in the Dorset Council area with a wind farm up there, I think 200 turbines proposed. That's going to decimate the labour force up there from the point of view of agriculture and hospitality. So with the regional jobs hub up there, it's like we're already talking to the state saying, how do we address these issues when the people that are working on the land can get 50% more of the wind farm than working on the farm? They're going to go. We see it now within our own things. There's an expectation of city wages in the country communities, and like we just tried to do recruitment for a project manager, project development facilitator. Our top candidate ended up being from New South Wales, coastal New South Wales. Yep, looked at the dollars, I was probably about 35% under what he's currently getting. So it's like, I could stretch it, but I couldn't get to 35%. So the labour market's incredibly competitive. State government, they just have a different salary level as well. When you look at a role in state compared to in local government, so we can't afford. I'd love to pay our people a lot more because of the work they do and the value they create, and when you compare it to similar roles, but our hands are tied there as well. So it makes it really hard to recruit.
It does make it hard. And also a factor for some roles, particularly in the planning and regulatory space, is that they can not only get more money but less abuse in the private sector or even at state level. So we are being as creative as we can with our recruitment campaigns, quirky ads, bigging up the lifestyle, the clean and green, but we're still, as I said, we're out on our 5th round for the Ranger now, and our planning team, which should have 7 people in it's down to 2.
You would think it would appeal to a lot of people. We've only got a little bit of time left, so I just want just final thoughts in a minute. Can I just confirm, we had 8,000 people in Circular Head Council and around 5,000 rateable dwellings.
Yes.
So a dwelling is where someone lives. So does that mean we've got a lot of single people? Are they
There's an ageing demographic, certainly.
widowers and widows?
I couldn't give you the percentage, but yes,
What's
we've
your
got.
gut feel like? Is that
Yeah, we've got.
a lot of people living alone then?
I think that's probably.
Yeah, we've, dare I say, corporate farming's made a big influence on that demographic we're talking about, the family unit. Whereas used to be, you take a place like Tagari, for example, there used to be 10 farms with 10 families, mum, dad and 1, 2, 3, 4 kids, sometimes more. Now you've got 1 or 2 farms with a manager, sometimes more often than not married or not partnered. So that family influence has dropped away.
Yeah. And so for Break a Day Council, what was the population we were looking at
We're
there?
about 7,000.
Yep.
We, being where we are on the coast, we're the typical holiday home community. So about 35% of our residences are not permanent residences. So we actually, if you look at our population, it really doesn't give a picture of the number of properties that we're servicing. We've actually got 6,400 rateable properties on the coast. The other thing with the thing between the census periods, we churned 34% of our population. So 34% of our population moved in and 34% moved out. We actually had more than 34% moved in. We actually had 12% population
What
growth.
census again? Is that 5
20
years?
21.
21
Yeah,
and
21
20.
and 2016. We had that. 34% left. But fortunately we had about 47% move in. So we had good solid growth. The other
Churn.
The work that Lisa Denny has recently done for us, she also looked at housing situation, and we've got a mismatch between the number of people in a residence and the number of bedrooms available. We have a lot of properties with surplus bedrooms where you've got one person in a 3 or 4 bedroom house. It's quite skewed, and that is because of the fact that ageing population, 1 or 2 people in the house. And so if we can shift that by the creation of attractive living premises for people moving into the age, which includes me in a few years' time, then that will free up beds for families and for workforce to grow as well. So it's all that mismatch when you look at number of beds versus population. That's interesting.
He's describing me. And that's in our areas where 3 and we can make up another bedroom. We basically live there because once or twice a year the kids will come home and they've got somewhere to stay. So that's really
we're the same with
describing that situation.
So it's interesting when you really delve into that and some of those structural issues that we've got to deal with. But at least if we're aware of it, we can develop strategies to address that and just try and shift the needle a bit. So the beauty about what we had in that period was that we had 220 new permanent residences in that census period. So that's 220 families moved into the area. Unfortunately, the completions for new houses was about half that. Approvals were double, around 200 odd approvals for new houses. Completions were only half.
That's a workforce challenge with the builders.
Also cost. I think people looked at that. They look at return on investment for this and say, why would we build that when we're only going to get 4% return on that investment? I'm not going to do it. We can get better money in the bank without any issues.
No, we've heard that evidence a fair bit.
I've actually got a good solution, but no one in the federal government's taken it on for me, but hopefully they will.
Well,
And
feel free.
You're going to put rates up.
no, I've got a better solution.
That's available to you.
Yeah, I think what the federal government, they can pull one particular lever around capital gains tax, and that would be to make anything that runs commercial as residential, as in Airbnb, 100% CGT. Anything in the private rental market is CGT exempt.
Well done, John. You just got that on the record.
Thank you.
But
I suggested to a local member, but he didn't come back to me on that one. So.
no, Scotty will take that up. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but really thank you for your attendance here today. If you wanted to provide any additional information, I don't think we asked for any specifically, but if you did want to provide any additional information, get that to the Secretariat by 11th of October. We'll send you a copy of the transcript of your evidence, so you'll have an opportunity to request corrections to any transcription errors. Safe trip back. Really appreciate you coming to spend some time with us, and you'll see the report come out in a little while, but really appreciate your input, both for the submissions and your evidence today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, we will now just suspend while we work out the next, where we get the next witnesses settled. We'll have a brief discussion with them. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Up some stuff, so up. We'll resume the hearing. I've got to do a quick spiel here. So in accordance with our committee's resolution on the 4th of August 2022, this hearing is being broadcast on the Parliament's website, and the proof and official transcripts of proceedings will be published on the inquiry website. Those present here today are advised that filming and recording are permitted during the hearing. I remind members of the media of the need to fairly and accurately report the proceedings of the committee. Have we still got Deputy Chair on the line? Anyway,
Yes, you do, Chair.
yeah. Thanks, Deputy Chair. This was a later addition to the timings. That's why we provided a bit more space in the hearing today. Members of the ASU will introduce themselves in a minute. We met in Canberra, but I'm the chair of this committee, Luke Gosling. I represent Darwin and Palmerston in the federal parliament. The deputy chair, that little speaker there, that is Tony Passon, who's the deputy chair of the committee, and the shadow minister for a number of things. Tony, can you just remind me?
Just infrastructure and transport.
Infrastructure and transport. Scotty?
Scotty Buchholz from Queensland, southeast corner.
For the Hansard record, can you please state your full names and the capacities in which you appear before the committee today?
So my name's Samantha Batchelor, the ASU Tasmanian Coordinator with the ASU Vic Tas branch.
I'm Jo Swan and I'm an ASU delegate for the City of Launceston.
Lonnie? So you didn't drive very far?
No.
Misha Pringle, ASU delegate for the City of Hobart.
Hobart.
Corinne Ball, ASU delegate for the Valley Children's Centre in New Norfolk.
Where's New Norfolk?
Just north of Hobart, sort of 40 minutes.
Okay.
Up the valley, Derwent Valley.
They picked you up on the way.
I
Well-
met them.
Absolutely.
Good.
Yes,
Actually, it was
yes.
quite good,
Yeah, it was
wasn't
good. Yeah.
Welcome. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to discussion to assist with the transcription of the public hearing. Well, we should be pretty okay here because Hansard can see you all and your name tags. But because we've got limited time, just focus on the really big issues front up, and then we'll have a little bit of Q&A. We'll end the hearing for the day, but as I said, we can continue the discussion afterwards. So welcome, thanks for making the trip up, and please provide an opening statement.
Thank you, and thanks for having us here today. As the Australian Services Union representing local government workers in Tasmania, we are very pleased to see the government's action on undertaking this local government inquiry. I think it's fair to say that in Tasmania, the impacts of federal funding to local government have a significantly larger effect. We have a very dispersed population with many regional communities who are smaller in size and therefore very heavily reliant in many of those instances on the federal assistance grants funding. We also have some really high community need, and local government is the closest layer of government perhaps to the community in that sense, and so is often stepping up and finding creative and innovative solutions to problems that exist within their communities. In Tasmania, there are a really large number of those examples. We have local governments who are providing general practice services, and that's come out of a issue of their communities having a desperate need for general practice services that don't exist if local government don't step in and provide that. So up until recently, for example, the Glamorgan Spring Bay Council on the east coast of Tasmania has provided medical services to their residents. Now, the east coast, we're talking an hour or 2 hours away from Hobart, so a major centre, and without the provision through council, those services wouldn't exist. They had gone to tender on multiple occasions, and unfortunately there wasn't sort of a private provider that presented. The good news is that has changed just recently, but in the interim that actually resulted in effectively an additional line on the community's rates to pay for those medical services. Those services are still provided, for example, as well in the Huon Valley through the council, who operate 3 GP practices. Other examples that I think really point to that service provision of last resort and the high prevalence in Tasmania are in things like childcare, and I'll probably invite Corinne to tell you a little bit about that in a moment, but we have a range of councils, the Derwent Valley Council, Waratah Wynyard Council, Central Coast Council and Glenorchy City Council, who are all providing childcare services. There's a major shortage and issues in terms of access to childcare service. I think that is occurring nationally, but probably even more prevalently here in Tasmania, which obviously has a really big impact of people's ability to have economic participation. On the more obscure and interesting sides, perhaps, for the community is we do also have councils who are providing and stepping in and providing postal services. We have Flinders Island who run the funeral services. We also have independent living and a number of aged care arrangements that essentially have arisen out of a need that communities have identified for these services that haven't been being provided, potentially by the market or another provider. Obviously, that also adds additional pressure in terms of funding for councils, in terms of essentially funding that out of their rate revenue to deliver those services for their communities. So we think, that there absolutely is a need to see the overall federal assistance grants funding restored to that level of around 1%, and that would enable councils to deliver good quality services. The other element I think that happens at the same time as this sort of diminishing amount of money happens is that, beyond those sort of niche obscure examples perhaps, there is just an increasing demand on councils as well. And so that's coming about from, high expectations of maintenance of, roads, footpath services, but also on things around like climate change and dealing with, health and wellbeing of communities. I know one of our delegates who couldn't join us today as well, who works in the health and wellbeing space and looking after, issues that they're having in their community with what, could be perceived, I guess, as antisocial behaviour, but is obviously driven by complex social factors underpinning that. So they're coming up with solutions to address that need in their community, whether it's across mental health or whether it's across youth engagement. We're seeing increasing demand on councils who are well equipped to do that because they know their communities, they're connected to their communities, but it does put that increasing pressure on how they do all of these fantastic things, with diminishing potential revenues available to them. I know for the ASU as well on a whole, it's really important that we do look at the impacts of things like rate capping, although fortunately in Tasmania it's not something we have experienced yet, other than, some drastic sort of wage freeze situations post-pandemic, which have now been resolved, but that does also have a really drastic impact on services being provided. The other element that's really important, we think, in this is that government can play a really important role in making sure that essentially third tier of government, local government, is a good quality employer, an employer that fosters good quality, direct, secure employment and jobs in local communities. In a place like Tasmania, we have many communities where local government is the largest employer in the town because they are small communities, and so it's incredibly important that we can provide that good quality, secure employment across Tasmania and in our regions. So to that effect, we would be very keen to see the committee also look at, what can we do to ensure that we're fostering good procurement principles, principles that ensure that councils are preferencing direct, quality, secure jobs over extensive outsourcing. Our experience of outsourcing definitely sees the risks, degradation of services. I think best put to me by a delegate about risking quality control. So essentially, when you outsource it, you don't have control that service is being delivered to the standard or quality that you necessarily want, and in many instances actually costing the community overall more. So we've got a range of councils where outsourcing is existing at really high levels, and we would like to see also encouragement to local government to make sure that they are being that model tier of government employment of good quality secure jobs that benefit Tasmanians. And I think there's a really other important aspect to this too, that we are facing some really and maybe heightened demographic issues here in Tasmania with an ageing population. So we are seeing a lot of that skills walk out the door, and we're seeing a lack of adequate workforce planning across the sector around what we need to ensure that we're actually bringing in new people, whether it be through apprenticeship, traineeship programs or solid workforce planning, noting that there can be interlinking issues with other sort of policy areas like access to housing in communities to attract staff, access to TAFE, access to tertiary education. But that we're actually also addressing that issue of making sure that we've got the local government workforce that we need for the future to deliver the skills that we need. So they are really the summary comments of myself, and I'm conscious of your time. But I thought I might invite Corinne to tell you a little bit about her community and the important role that she plays there.
Okay.
Thank you.
I work for the Valley Children's Centre, and we provide a service for our community for our children from age 6 weeks to 12 years. We are the only childcare centre in our area. The closest to us would be at least half an hour, 40 minutes away. Our community is a growing community. We have lots and lots of new subdivisions being built and lots of families moving in. We have we have enough children on our waiting list to fill another centre, but we obviously haven't got that facility and we have not got the staff to staff it. We, at the moment, are working in demountable rooms because our main building, because of its age, has had leaking problems in the ceiling that's happened for almost over 2 years now, and they've moved us out to deal with that and re-roof it, but we're in these demountables, which is okay, but it's not ideal for a childcare service. Our meals that we give our children are not cooked on the premises. They are over at the main council chambers, which is quite a few streets away, and they get delivered to us like in a vinyl pizza carrier that pizza boxes come in. We deal with just different issues every day of working within this, and because these demountables are on main of our playground area, that's been cut down by more than half, so our children aren't outside a lot on the playground equipment because of this.
Are there other private providers, or is the council the
We have been put out to tender a few times and no interest, probably because of the condition of the building that has been let go, hasn't had any maintenance for a long time, and with the damage, the water damage, we had to close off areas, rooms, and.
Can I ask about aged care as well? Any of the councils where your members are providing aged care services?
Yeah, so Dorset Council up at Scottsdale is involved with aged care provision, also Glamorgan Spring Bay Council. There potentially are more, but off the top of my head, at least those two.
If you could take that on notice, because we are interested in any examples of where there's cost shifting from any level of government, but where, as you mentioned, there was a council who had to pick up provision of health services for a while until that got sorted. But if there's other examples of where aged care is being provided simply because it's, as you say, the service provider of last resort. Thanks for that evidence. We get a good sense of the demographics in Tassie as well, where it's an ageing population. So there may be a situation where there's more of a call on local government to provide aged care services, but that'll depend how the new reforms flesh out. We've got a little bit of time left, but did you want to let us know anything in particular?
My driver's downstairs and it's not a common car, it's a private token, he needs to get a car.
No worries.
You need a lift.
No, I'm good. I'm good for it. Yeah, no, Tone's still on that. Cool.
Excuse me.
That's okay.
Excuse
No
me.
worries. Thanks for your time.
So were you going to...
Yeah, look, I'll just speak a bit, I guess, to the resourcing of the City of Hobart, I think, is our biggest issue. We have a council that is, over the last 4 to 5 years, has had massive levels of staff attrition. It's something that's kind of constant and ongoing at the moment. We're sort of seeing staff disappearing and not being replaced, funding issues around that, just sort of budget cuts. It becomes it's easier to leave that position vacant and save the money, and then that then in turn increases the workload on staff in areas throughout the council, indoor and outdoor staff. So we're seeing a huge amount of staff burnout, and it's a self-perpetuating problem because one person leaves, their co-worker takes on their workload, that person then gets burnt out, and they leave and the next person sort of takes it on. That is compounded by the fact that the continual and fast turnover means that organisational knowledge is constantly being lost from the council. People who've been there for a long time during sort of slightly better conditions prior to sort of this ongoing cost of living pressures and that sort of thing, they are leaving. They take a lot of that knowledge and understanding that they have. The new people who come on board, they then don't have that sort of long-term support that they might need to sort of allow them to properly deliver the services that we do. The culture along the way then suffers throughout, because you're sort of talking about people who are working in situations and in environments where there's not an ability to collaborate and sort of work with other people, because everyone's sort of so insular and siloed in what they do in order to actually just get their job done and keep their heads down and sort of get out at the end of the day with their mental health intact. And we're sort of seeing it across the council in terms of indoor staff where sort of, I suppose, positions that are doing risk management, procurement, sort of financial type stuff, areas where there's significant responsibility and financial impact to the council if decisions aren't made well or without the correct resourcing. We're seeing those sort of impacts occurring all the time, really, because there's just not enough people there to actually support that decision making and the kind of I suppose support that it needs to be done well, and to be done with the level of responsibility we'd all like to do it with. I mean, everyone who's at council is working there because they want to support the community and they want to do it well. We see a lot of people putting in long hours when they shouldn't need to. I mean, they should be just working a 9-to-5 job. They're not getting paid particularly well compared to other levels of government and private sort of enterprise. They could be getting paid a lot more elsewhere, but they work there because they want to support the community. They like the outcomes and the output.
Their motivation.
And the motivation's so true. We've had cultural surveys done over the last 8 years. 2016, a human synergistic survey done with pretty unfavourable results. 8 years later, a bunch of restructures and attempts to fix it. No change whatsoever. People sort of suffering because of that. So the intent there, and the thing that comes out of that always, is that everyone's happy to be there, they're happy to be doing their job, but they're not happy with the circumstances and the situation that they're forced to work in. The sort of succession planning that Sam touched on in terms of those people who come and go, who leave without a chance to bring new people up to speed. On our external crews, we have a lot of long-term skills. I mean, council traditionally has been a 30-year career sort of thing, 40 years, 50 years in some instances. So there's people who've developed a skill set in a job that pays well enough to survive and to live and pay your mortgage sort of thing and put your kids through school. We're seeing a lot less of that now. And those people, as they retire or they go off to somewhere that's slightly more lucrative or into different levels of government, they leave these gaps behind. The people who come up behind them aren't provided with the sort of the resources or the pathways to develop their own skills and sort of fill those gaps. And that in turn, I suppose, compounds the levels of stress and the weight that's put on those people, which slowly leads us to these reduced size crews. Those in turn then lead to increased levels of outsourcing because we can't deliver services well enough internally, and that in turn continues to circle, and we get the culture degrades because jobs are being outsourced to external areas and people are feeling that stress. So it's this sort of, it's what feels like this constant circular sort of level of negativity that just makes it really difficult for people to do the job that they love doing and they enjoy doing and have that level of community involvement. And so often I think the people that I speak to, it's the job satisfaction that's keeping them there in spite of the conditions and the lower pay and the sort of mental load that they end up taking on for doing that sort of job. And so we end up with people who work in public service in what should be a safe, secure, consistent sort of job, but they're doing it almost as out of passion, which I think is not a great situation to be
in. Yeah, well said. How are we going for time, Anne? So we've got 3 minutes before we need to call it quits, but as I said, we can keep having a chat. Did you want
I can
to
just
add
reiterate
anything?
what Mish has said, that it's
Yeah.
not just a Hobart Council issue, it's a City of Launceston one. We have culture assessments which are not happily reflected, so our culture's not where it should be. This again leads to fairly large restructures which we underwent in order to fix that problem, but unfortunately it led to us losing about 7 senior managers because they were forced to reapply for their roles or accept a redundancy. Many of them have been there for a long time, so they accepted a redundancy and left that week. So we had all of this corporate knowledge. We're also finding that our longer term staff members, people who have been there for more than 10 years, are disgruntled with what's happening, and so they're leaving, and we're not getting people on board who can learn from those people, because we're not taking on trainees. We do take on some apprentices for our outdoor workforce and our mechanical workshop, but we're not taking on trainees in our internal staff who can learn things so that then they can take this on. And it all comes down to we are told that there isn't the funding available, there isn't the dollar figure isn't available to do this. We can't employ someone for you to train before you retire because we can't have 2 people in the same job. We can't pay that. And so it means that people who've been there for a long time and who have made jobs their own and have so much corporate knowledge are walking out the door with it. And then there's no one there to pick that up. And you're right back to. So
More difficult for everyone.
it makes it more difficult for people who, because you're not just relied on for one area when you have a lot of corporate knowledge, it's somebody will come and say, do you remember? And that's not able to be shared anymore. We used to be able to share that with people because you would have people getting ready to retire and they would say, I'm going to retire in 6 months. Okay, we're going to get someone in to learn from you for that whole 6 months that you're going. They can learn from you, but we don't do that anymore. We don't even advertise until probably 4 weeks after the person's left the role.
Someone else has been covering in the meantime.
And then somebody else takes it on and does the job of 2 people, and then they're expected to say, okay, well, I know a bit about this, so I'm going to train this new person, or not necessarily, you're going to train this new person. This new person is more what we see. Yep. So.
No, thank you, Joe. That's good evidence and much appreciated. Because we've got to give Hansard time to pack up, we'll call the recorded part to a hold. I'll just formally close the hearing by saying thanks for your attendance here today. Just with that aged care piece, if you can provide any additional information, can you forward it to the Secretariat by the 11th of October, please? And other examples of health being covered at the local government area would be much appreciated. We'll send you a transcript of your evidence and you'll have an opportunity to request corrections to transcription errors. But you've got a lot of your key points there in around federal assistance grants and some of the pressures that are on staff in local government areas. And thanks for the correspondence that we received to look at some of those Tasmania specific instances of pressure in financial sustainability of local government. So thanks again for your time, and I declare this public. Before I do that, can I thank the Deputy Chair also for hanging around until the very end, and I declare this public hearing closed.
Thanks, Chair.